Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto becomes Master of Dragon Sage Mode Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Kakashi Haddock was very late. Under normal circumstances he would only be about a half an hour behind schedule, but today he was irritated. And to anyone who knew the lazy bones Jonin, that wasn't easy to do. Annoyed, sure. Who wasn't irritated on occasion? Yet for the usually level-headed Haddock to actually be perturbed about something. That was a fairly rare occurrence. But it was one that was to be expected. Why? Because he had opened his carefully concealed mouth at just the wrong time. Worst of luck for him. It had started that morning with the usual routine. Wake up, read for an hour. Eat, read some more. Get dressed and head out to Hokage's tower for any missions, reading all the while. But that was where his pleasant morning had taken a noticeable turn for the worse. When he'd arrived at the Hiruzen's spacious office, it was in a state of uproar. The Hokage, who was usually a kind and grandfatherly figure, was in a full-tilt shouting match with Saya Haruno, arguably the most annoying woman in all of Konoha. If not the entirety of the Land of Fire, their voices were angry and belligerent, and by the diminutive, almost skittish demeanor of the Ambu, the two had been at it for a while. A part of him actually felt sorry for them. Kakashi landed and managed to rein in the urge to release his self-admitted annoying catchphrase. And boy was he lucky he did. The old cripple. How dare you put my daughter on the same team as that hateful thing. I will not allow her to be taken advantage of. Hiruzen shouted back, you will refrain from calling the boy that. He is no animal and will be treated as a normal boy. His name is Naruto Uzumaki, and if you call him a thing or a demon one more commie damn time, I swear your precious daughter will be sent to live with him. Kakashi looked on in growing fear, not for his own safety, but for the Ambu who seemed to be wilting under the Hokage's anger. However, thankfully, Saya's mouth snapped shut like a steel trap. Her wide angry eyes, not at all attractive in Kakashi's opinion, were drilling holes in Hiruzen. The old man relaxed back into his chair with a sigh, his gaze falling coldly on the village council member before him. Sakura was in the exact middle of the class, Sasuke at the top, and Naruto at the bottom. Their talents balance out, and more importantly, all three require specialized attention. I did not put her on the same team as Naruto on purpose, I assure you. If I had known you would complain so loudly, I might just have given her to one of the other teams. Then do it. I will do no such thing. The places are set and there is nothing you can do or say about it to change my mind or the outcome of the situation. Sakura Haruno is officially part of Team 7. There was a pause, and Kakashi decided it would be the perfect time to drop in on the conversation. How wrong he had been. So now he was walking towards the academy where he would meet the rest of his team. He grumbled, still greatly agitated. They just had to see me with my icha, didn't they? This sucks, the big one. All the reading I could have gotten while they were training was gone. That was his punishment for being there at the wrong time. Saya had at last agreed to let her daughter stay on his team, but the moment she saw the little orange book, well, you could probably guess what happened. She declared that he was not to read porn in front of the girl. And Hiruzen, either out of desperation, maliciousness, or some other hidden sadistic tendency, had agreed with her. It didn't even make sense. The Hokage was the one who bought him the last book when it came out as congratulations for completing his first S-rank mission alone. In effect, he was banned from reading icha while with his team. And that was not acceptable. Not even a teeny tiny little itty bitty bit. It was so far up on his uncool list, he might have to make a new one. Out of all the things you could have banned, why? A short time later, Kakashi fixed a smile in his one visible eye, much as he would have done if he held a monocle there, and walked into the academy. He immediately turned right and into one of the classrooms. The door opened and nothing. He blinked in momentary surprise. He'd been expecting a greeting from his new students. Instead he received, possibly the coldest reception he'd ever had the displeasure of getting from a genin. Sasuke Uchiha, dark and silent as the rumors said he was, didn't even bother looking at him. His dark eyes were focused on the blackboard at the front of the class. Kakashi figured he was trying to train his killing intent or something else stupid like that. Sakura Haruno, he'd have to get back at her somehow, was staring at Sasuke with the utmost admiration. Grade A fangirl. That's the last thing I need. Kakashi turned to the last member of the team. His smile faded. A small blonde boy sat at one of the desks, chin resting on his crossed arms. He was either pissed off about something or he was mimicking the icha. One or the other. He hoped it was the former. He wasn't sure if he could cope with two brooding preteens without his precious erotica. A full minute passed as he took in the potentially awkward situation. Then he decided that some fresh air was definitely part of the solution. You'll be on the roof in 5 minutes for introductions. Not even a glance apart from the pinkette turning slightly from her dark avenger. Kakashi grimaced and shined away. He didn't have to wait long for his prospective students to arrive. Sasuke appeared first and walked over to sit down at one of two benches. Sakura followed like an obedient puppy, sitting down close to him. Kakashi waited for the blonde to arrive. The boy was a long time in coming, but eventually Naruto walked into view and sat down. Kakashi glanced at him somewhat worried. This wasn't how the Hokage had described Naruto at all. He was supposed to be an overconfident bundle of energy with an unpredictable streak a mile wide. Not a downer with a glare and bags under his eyes. And keeping in kind who his parents were, this was defiantly out of character. Kakashi mentally pinched himself before speaking. Well, in case you didn't know, I Kakashi Haddock am your new sensei. Now why don't you three introduce yourselves? Black hair and blonde hair didn't even twitch. Pinky spoke up first, giving Kakashi some hope as to her prospects. Then his ears caught up with his head. Perhaps you could give us a demonstration, sensei. Kakashi felt as though he'd been smacked. Seriously? She doesn't know how to introduce herself. Okay, this is going to be a long day. If I need to explain how to introduce yourself, then I might as well send you back to the academy because you obviously don't have enough common sense to be a ninja. Any more questions? His voice was blunt like the side of a rock hammer and her eyes went wide. She blinked back in shock. It was then that Kakashi remembered she was Saya's daughter and almost certainly coddled. He would have to break his back just to get through that stubborn shell of incompetence. This isn't going well. He coughed. Ahem, now Sasuke. How about you introduce yourself then? I assume you know how. Sasuke didn't move, but he did speak. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. There's not a lot of things I like. Learning new jutsu is one of them. I dislike many things. I don't feel like telling you what my hobbies are. As for what I want to do, my goal is to kill a certain someone slowly. As he finished, Kakashi received a brief flash of clarity. I am going to hate my life for the next few months, I can see it now. Kakashi and Squad 7, the most dysfunctional team in the history of the Hidden Leaf. This sudden vision disturbed him more than he was willing to admit to himself. He figured that it was time for the real tiebreaker. So Naruto. Why don't you tell us about yourself? The blonde's eyes rose to meet his. Kakashi experienced a chill. Naruto coughed once before speaking. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like ramen and training and sleeping. I dislike not being able to sleep for 6 days straight, and I also don't like bullies or people who are rude to me. I spend most of my time training. And my goal is to become Hokage. Naruto looked into the cyclopsian gaze of his new teacher. It was so very hard not to be angry. He was exhausted, wiped. He couldn't muster the energy to smile at this point. Kakashi, for his part, looked surprised, which for some reason pissed him off. It might have been because he was almost an hour late to the meeting. Or it could have been because the man looked like he'd had a good night's sleep. Something he hadn't had in a while. Or it might just have been that the guy reeked of dogs. Naruto made a mental note to prank the living hell out of him as soon as he was feeling better. The main problem with that was simple. He wasn't quite sure if he would feel any better. Sleep had seemed to have decided to put his name at the top of its blacklist. He wanted rest, but every time he closed his eyes and let darkness take him, the nightmares started. After 4 sleepless nights, he'd given up on resting at all. That was almost 64 hours without sleep so far. Even knowing that he was a Jinchuriki now, it was still far too long without some decent shut-eye. Kakashi seemed to regain his composure and looked back to the group as a whole. He sounded slightly nervous. Well, now then, I guess you three are what I have to work with. Anyway, all 3 of you still need to pass one last test before you're a part of Squad 7. What? That was Sakura, looking worried. Sasuke muttered, figures. Naruto sighed tiredly and pinched himself to keep awake. Kakashi took in their responses. He decided to change from his usual schedule. The test is to see if you're actually worth my time. It will take place at noon tomorrow at Training Field 7. And make sure you don't eat anything beforehand or you'll throw up. Sakura looked confused but nodded. Sasuke frowned. This all seemed just a bit abrupt, especially given how long it took him to show up. Is that all? Or can we go now? Kakashi waved his hand easily. You're free to go now, my precious little almost genin. Immediately Sasuke stood and left, quickly followed by Sakura. Kakashi glanced at Naruto as the blonde slowly stood. His posture showed sheer exhaustion. That was a bit worrying. He knew the boy wasn't supposed to look like this. Hey Naruto, wait a moment. Naruto halted a second later, swiveling on one foot. What is it, sensei? Are you alright? You look done in. The moment passed and the boy nodded. I'm fine. Just need to get some sleep. What was that comment during your introduction about? Have you really not slept for 6 days? If so, I can stall the test. I seriously doubt anyone could pass my test when they're dead on their feet. Naruto gave him a look. It dripped anger like the poisonous fangs of a serpent. Kakashi was gripped by a powerful urge to step back, but he was already at the edge of the roof. Naruto whispered something half to himself and turned away, walking back into the academy and down the stairs. The silver-haired jonin scratched his chin in deep thought. After a while he decided to speak with the old man about this, he felt as though something was wrong with Naruto. Something very wrong. Later that day Naruto lay in bed. His eyes closed, unable to sleep but unable to stay awake. He walked the thin boundary between one world and the next. He didn't dare cross over into the realm of dreams. Visions of fire and blood filled every moment, stealing any chance for rest. But with each passing moment he came closer to the edge. Closer to the land of darkness. Naruto's eyes flickered once then twice and finally closed. His head lolled to the side as his body relaxed, complete exhaustion overtaking him. The next day, Kakashi stood in front of 3 kids who were in various states of weakness. Sasuke looked a bit tired but otherwise normal. Sakura had large circles under her eyes like Naruto and her stomach would growl ominously every few moments. Obviously she'd taken the bait and skipped breakfast. Naruto on the other hand looked like a zombie. His eyes were half closed and he was barely standing. Every couple seconds he would twitch and his head would rise, his eyes focusing on him for a second before dropping again. Kakashi knew that he wouldn't be able to do much of anything in that state. Sasuke, who was watching the blonde suspiciously, probably realized the same thing. I think we have a bit of a problem, guys. Kakashi turned to Sasuke and Sakura. I don't think our boy Naruto is feeling well. How about you two wait here and work on some kind of plan for the test? I should probably take Naruto to the hospital to see what's wrong. Sakura nodded. I think I remember hearing him say something about being tired in class, maybe he just needs a nap or something. Kakashi had taken note of that already, but listed her comment as a bonus since she wasn't a completely lost cause when it came to observation. You might be right. Naruto. Are you listening? The blonde didn't answer. He asked again, but Naruto didn't even shift. Sakura scowled. Hey, are you deaf? Answer Kakashi-sensei. She reached out and put a hand on his shoulder ready to shake him. Naruto reacted like a gunshot, his arm snaking around hers locking it out straight. Sakura cried out in pain as Naruto spun towards her, keeping her arm locked and bringing his hand to bear. Kakashi darted forward to intercept the strike. He grabbed his wrist and pulled the two of them apart. Naruto baka. What the hell? Naruto? What are you doing? He didn't answer. Kakashi bent down and his lone eye widened. Naruto was asleep. His eyes were shut and his breathing steady. The dark circles under his eyes were much more pronounced than Sakura's and he felt cold. Good Kami, he did that just from reflex. Kakashi didn't know what to make of that. Either the kid was holding back on his exam or something odd was up. Plus his talk with the Hokage hadn't yielded anything of interest. He was in the dark. After a moment of consideration he turned to the other 2 genin. Sakura, Sasuke. The test is cancelled for today. I'll send a message hound once I have this sorted out. Go ahead and train for now. They nodded as Kakashi picked Naruto up and shined away. He reappeared just seconds later in the Hokage's office. The instant he did his keen ears registered a conversation cutting off. He glanced around the room, searching for the aged Kage. Hiruzen was there standing by the window that overlooked the east side of the village. Beside him was his son Asuma. The Hokage turned and saw Naruto in his arms, worry suddenly flashing across his wrinkled face. Kakashi. What happened? Naruto collapsed before I could start the test. I think he's suffering from acute exhaustion, but I can't see a good reason for it. Asuma turned as well. Has he been overtraining himself again? Choji and Shikamaru tell me he's a training nut surpassed only by Guy and Lee. Kakashi shrugged. I was stopping by to tell you before I take him to the hospital to get checked. At first I thought he was sick, but those with his condition can't get sick. That is true, Hiruzen admitted with a touch of unease apparent in his voice. They paused as Naruto mumbled and twisted in Kakashi's grip. Huh? Naruto? He realized the boy was still out of it. He was mumbling in his sleep. Hiruzen stepped forward to examine him but stopped dead when the boy grumbled loudly. Shut up, stupid fox. Kakashi looked up at Hiruzen as the old man's eyes went wide. No. Please tell me I didn't just hear that. Naruto groaned as he opened his eyes. Only to feel something wet drop on his face. He looked up and glimpsed a dark shadowed ceiling. Confused and still very tired he just lay there, wondering how he'd come to be laying here. A moment passed and another drop of liquid fell, plopping between his eyes. He groaned again and forced himself to sit up. Something about the darkness around him told him that something was very different, but he was just too exhausted. The knowledge refused to make any impression on him. So, deciding that there was nothing else for it, he rose to his feet. He was a bit unsteady at first. However, he regained his balance quickly as he looked down at himself, not really understanding why he wasn't wet from the water obscuring the floor. Then his ears registered a sound. At first he thought it was a large bee. Then he realized bees didn't live underground. A few seconds passed before it registered that he was listening to someone humming. Naruto turned around. He was in a long dark corridor. The sound was echoing down the hall behind him. He felt a stab of curiosity and walked back down the watery path before him. It seemed to be made of a dull gray stone, and there were three odd things in the ceiling of the corridor. They seemed to be pipes, but at the same time he didn't think they were. Yet all he could do was follow where they led. He walked for a long time, turning occasionally with the bends in the tunnel. Water sloshed at his feet, ankle deep and lukewarm. Time passed and humming became more distinct, becoming a voice. It was feminine. That much he was sure of. Other than that though he still hadn't the faintest idea what was going on. Naruto felt a tug in his chest as he at last saw a doorway and the faded bar of light that showed through. Some of his exhaustion faded away and he moved swiftly towards it. A few steps later he reached out for the doorframe, sticking his head out to see what was inside. Amazement caught him off guard and he stepped inside. It was a huge chamber, so massive that he couldn't see the ceiling. And through the center ran bars, each as wide as two men standing abreast. The cathedral-sized room was gray and dank. But at the same time it was oddly comforting. Where am I? Your subconscious. Naruto's eyes flicked to the cage bars that split the room in half. His jaw dropped. Inside was a beautiful girl. She looked no older than 17, though her long crimson hair was longer than she was tall. It fanned out around her as she sat on the other side of the divide. He looked her up and down. She was completely naked, which helped in the assumption that she was not human. Black marks like cursive script traced a circle around her stomach. Her pale skin was flawless besides that. Naruto caught her gaze and found dark red eyes the color of blood. Red slits that seemed inquisitive. And behind her drifted 9 thick tails covered in dark orange fur. Naruto blinked and stepped back. Kyuubi, I don't really like that name. Why don't you come closer and I'll tell you my real one. Her voice was sweet and pleasant, rich and commanding. It sent shivers down his spine and he felt a compulsion to move closer. Shut up, stupid fox, I know what you are. You're the demon that destroyed my village. She cocked her head and her ears, long and dark orange, turned downward. I did attack your home, but it wasn't my choice. Naruto wasn't sure exactly what happened all those years ago, but he knew she couldn't be telling the truth. He shouted, you lie. You should know better than most that not all is what it seems. The villagers call you demon when you are not. Is it such a stretch to think they are wrong about me as well? She crooked a finger tipped with a small black claw. Come here, boy. I want to talk to you face to face. He stepped back even though his stomach wrenched in protest. Why should I listen to you? You're a monster. Her head dipped and her small shoulders slumped. Yes, I am. But that doesn't mean we cannot speak honestly. Please come closer. Naruto saw her hurt expression and almost gasped in pain. Red eyes rose to meet his, and Naruto lost his battle with curiosity and longing. He wanted to move to her and so he did. She smiled as he stopped at the bars to her prison. He sank to his knees, leaning against the cool metal. A moment later she stood and stepped closer. Naruto saw the orange blur of her tails as she sat down across from him. His eyes took in her features. She was stunning, truly breathtaking, inhumanly so. Her red lips quirked a bit as she leaned forward, looking at him more closely. Despite her being what she was, he couldn't prevent a blush from spreading across his cheeks. She was naked after all. Her swayed slightly, drawing his eyes away from her face. She giggled. So this might be interesting. You're my first male container. What's your name, young man? I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Oh? So you're her son. I guess Kushina didn't survive. Naruto broke out of his trance and looked back into her eyes. Why, you knew my mom? She was my previous vessel. Though we rarely spoke. Actually, this form of mine is very similar to hers, although I took it from my first container. What you see is merely a form I choose to take. I have no true body. What about my mom though? And how did she get stuck with you? The red-headed demon shook her head. Naruto, I don't want to be trapped here any more than in your mother. I am a prisoner within your mind with no power to escape. Don't make it seem like I want any of this. Then why? She pursed her lips and leaned back. Because of humans. We Biju, all of my kind, are powerful, and humans have sought this power for decades. I have lived within the minds of 3 separate generations. For your information, your village hunted me down for it. Is that why you attacked them? I was not myself at the time. A shinobi was controlling my actions during the attack. I never would have tried to kill your parents. Your father and I spoke more often than Kushina ever did. I'm telling you, I never intended to hurt the people of the village or cause you any pain. Naruto looked down. He was at once excited that she knew his family and guarded that she might lie to him about them. Or worse, that he would find out his parents weren't who he hoped they were like. My parents. You knew both of them? Yes. He felt tears welling in his eyes and quickly dashed them. What were they like? She smiled a bit. Kushina was a lot like me, sort of. She had a bad temper, but she was a kind woman. Overall, she was a generous person. As for Minato-kun, he was always calm and collected. He rarely did or said anything without thinking about it beforehand. He was also very kind, a bit too kind sometimes. Both of them were powerful, but you probably already know that. She shifted, seeming a little uncomfortable. If you want to speak to someone who knew them well, speak to Hiruzen Sarutobi if he's still alive." Naruto's eyes went wide. Gigi knew them. The confused look crossed her features. Why, of course. He had to. All of the Hokage's predecessors knew each other well. "Hokage, what do you mean?" "The Yondaime sealed you inside me. He's the only other Kage who was alive at the same time as the Sandaime." The Kyuubi blinked, still seeming a bit confused. "Yes, your father, the Yondaime Hokage. You did know that, right?" Her pupils contracted. No, you didn't know." Naruto was frozen. He felt like he'd been paralyzed. Shock, fear, amazement, and anger mixed in his mind. It seemed like an hour passed as he sat there stunned by her words. He couldn't believe it. His father had been the Hokage. It was like someone had just told him that he was the host for the Kyuubi. He let out a pained bark of laughter. "Oh wait, I was already told that." Naruto swallowed hard and stared up at her. "So you really are the Kyuubi?" She crossed her arms over her generous bust. "My name is Kurama. Please address me by that. I dislike being branded with that term." "Kurama, and you didn't attack the village because you wanted. Someone was making you do it." She nodded. "It was the day you were born. I suspect that someone powerful was taking advantage of your parents. You see, there are only a few times at which both male and female Jinchuriki are weakened. For females it is compounded though. When your mother was giving birth, the pain of it weakened the seal to the point that it almost released me." Kurama looked sorrowful. "Something happened. I was released. The last thing I remember was coming out of a great rage and being forced into you. So why am I here? Why can't I get any sleep? All the nightmares I've been having." She scooted as close to him as she could without touching the cage bars. Her eyes had taken on a more urgent cast. "I'm sorry, but that was my fault in all likelihood. I have been desperate for contact of late. I felt something happening outside, but not being able to see anything for years is frightening. Minato sealed me tighter than I have ever been sealed before. I couldn't even hear your thoughts until a few years ago." Kurama gestured to him with one delicate hand. "I felt the seal weaken a little less than a week ago, at least that's how long ago I think it happened. I still can't read your memories, so I have no hint as to what happened, however I tried my best to weaken the seal more." "Why? Isn't that a bad thing?" "I felt the need to speak you. It's been 12 years since I spoke to anyone. Can you imagine how lonely I was?" Naruto looked back at her. He felt like crying but he couldn't. He gathered his voice and croaked out, "Yes, the village hates me. I get beaten and no one will talk to me. The stores refuse to sell me anything, but trash, even Gigi can't help me all the time. He's too busy." He choked but forced himself to continue. "A few days ago my sensei almost died trying to save me from someone who tried to kill me." "Naruto, come here." Kurama held out her arm and Naruto threw himself forward. She hugged him tightly, leaning her head on his as she dragged her fingers through his hair. "Don't worry. I'll protect you from now on. Kushina and Minato were kinder to me than any humans ever have. You will be my little kid." "Naruto-kun, please sleep soundly." She smiled as she felt him relax in her arms. She pulled him fully into her side of the seal and laid back against the bars with him lying in her lap. Kurama's eyes were drawn to the chamber around them. The gloom lifted slightly, causing her to twitch her ears. She looked down to the boy. He reminded her of a very young Kushina, a bit if very sad. "I'll be there for you. I won't let the village hurt you for my actions, Naruto, my Naruto." Hiruzen and Kakashi let out a collective sigh as Naruto's writhing body relaxed suddenly. Kakashi had taken him to the hospital even as he began convulsing. He didn't stop either. After a few minutes they were forced to strap him down. The Sandaime ordered him to be given something to calm him down. The injection didn't work. Almost an hour later he was sleeping soundly. They watched now, thankful that he seemed to be resting finally. "I'll leave off the test until further notice. When we're sure he's recovered I'll do it then." Kakashi smoothed his fingers through his hair, his one uncovered eye red with worry. Hiruzen nodded in agreement. "Good, but I want a trusted member of the Yamanaka clan to look through his mind to find if he is unstable. We can't take any chances on the Kyuubi getting loose." "I understand that. Would you like me to get Inoichi?" The old man nodded. "I suppose he would be best at it." "Yes. Bring him here as soon as you can." Not 10 minutes later Inoichi stood over the bed looking concerned as the rest of them. He was the current head of the Yamanaka clan, a man of average height with prominent cheekbones and platinum blonde hair tied in a ponytail. His pale blue eyes slid over Naruto's unconscious form for several seconds before he formed a chain of hand seals. Then kneeling by the side of the bed he muttered, "Mind-walking technique." He closed his eyes in preparation to leave his body. Inoichi's eyes snapped open as pain exploded behind his eyes. He deactivated the jutsu a second before the excruciating pain could knock him out. Gasping he stood and stumbled back from the bed. "What happened?" Hiruzen asked sharply. "I don't know. I activated the jutsu, but before I even entered his mind something managed to stop me dead. It left me stranded for a moment. Not a pleasant experience." Kakashi had paled slightly and taken a step forward. "How is that possible?" Naruto hasn't received any training to resist Yamanaka mind techniques. And besides that he's barely a genin. You're a jonin and head of your clan. How is it that he blocked you? Inoichi shook his head. I have no way of knowing. You're right. It shouldn't be possible, but he does have the Kyuubi and he is aware of it now. I hazard a guess that the beast might have something to do with it, but truly there is no method for extracting the knowledge without hurting him. As you know, I'm more of an offensive infiltrator when it comes to my clan's jutsu. My wife has more skill with the gentle side of the branch. As they spoke, Naruto shifted a little, his breath coming out easily. Hiruzen grimaced. I will return to my duties. Please contact me if there is any change, but for now leave him be. They nodded before scattering to their various tasks and jobs, leaving Naruto to rest. Much later, Naruto opened his eyes again and yawned, stretching his arms out. He looked around himself, but for the life of him he couldn't remember how he'd gotten here. Wherever he was. He didn't recognize the gray walls or the huge metal bars to his right. It didn't take long for a teasing voice to speak from just behind his head. You're a brave little boy falling asleep on the most powerful demon in existence like that. Either you have great trust in me or you lack a sense of self-preservation. Naruto jerked forward and turned around to see her. She was smirking at him. Naruto colored as he glanced down, only for his eye to snap back to her eyes in embarrassment. Sorry I mean Kurama. No matter, Naruto-kun. Just remember that I'm not human. This body, for all its beauty, is just a copy. There really isn't any reason to be embarrassed. I know it's just you're naked, you know. He trailed off, trying not to meet her gaze or stare at any of her assets. Even for a boy as young as him it wasn't easy. Kurama just smiled. You remind me of Minato-kun. He was always too awkward when he visited me too, albeit for different reasons. Naruto perked up. So you really met my dad. I told you that already, didn't I? Yes. Minato used to come and talk to me often enough, although what we discussed wasn't what you would call personal. We talked easily enough. He was usually more curious about my abilities than anything else. He crossed his legs and asked, what do you mean by that? You're not human, so can you use jutsu? She raised an eyebrow. Why, yes. That's part of the reason why I choose this form over others. However, it takes some time to revert to this form outside. In reality, I have only taken a human form once. So why was my dad so interested in what you could do? Is there like some whole bunch of demon jutsu or something? Kurama shifted, wrapping her tails around herself in an effort to make the boy more comfortable. I have many abilities, 9 in particular. All of them are passive to a certain degree. And many of them are shared with my sisters and brothers. In addition to that, I can use most of the human jutsu you have learned about. Naruto was wide-eyed. But you have like never-ending chakra, right? So you could beat anyone if you were using jutsu, she smirked. You certainly are interested all of a sudden. Why are you so eager to learn jutsu? Naruto looked fierce for a moment. So I can become strong and prove to everyone in the village that I'm not useless. That I can be a hero. I'll become Hokage and everyone will have to respect me. Kurama sighed, a note of sorrow in her voice. Naruto, that isn't how it works. The people must respect you first before you can become Hokage. The Hokage isn't simply a powerful warrior. He is also the guardian of his people and the leader of the village. If you want the respect of the village, you will have to become something so great as to outweigh the hate they have for you. Is that something you're willing to do? She asked curiously. Of course. Well then, would you like my help? I can give you strength, though there will be a cost. He looked hesitant for a moment. Then he nodded. I want your help, Kurama. How silly of you. You don't even ask what the cost will be. Never make that mistake elsewhere, Naruto. You can't know if someone will take advantage of you. Oh, I guess you could tell me, but I need all the help I can get, right? She sighed inwardly. As you wish. Now come here, Naruto. You are the manifestation of your conscious mind. I need contact with you in order to use my powers. He paused before moving forward and letting her wrap her arms around him. This will feel odd. Try to relax. Naruto jerked awake in a white hospital bed in a plain white room. He looked around, his eyes taking in his surroundings. He sighed inwardly. At least there wasn't anyone else in the room. A loud bang to his left caused him to jump. His eyes flicked to the door leading out. What was that? Calm down. It's part of the changes I made. You can't expect to have me alter you without making your senses keener. You humans are so oblivious most of the time. Hey. Naruto muttered indignantly. Hey yourself. For now all I did was heighten the strength of your vision and hearing. Once you get used to that, I'll work on your sense of smell, then touch and taste. Keep in mind the senses build upon each other, so each alteration will feel just as sudden and strange as the last. What about? Oh. Right. I have stopped restricting the flow of my chakra to a certain degree, however this isn't a complete blessing. Remember that you have poor control already. You have the same amount of chakra as a strong jonin at the moment, not counting my own chakra. I know you told me that, but what does that have to do with using jutsu again? A sigh came from the back of his mind. As I said, the more chakra you have, the harder it becomes to control. Most shinobi have a pitiful amount of chakra, which is part of the reason why there is such a high demand for Uzumaki and similar clans. Clans such as yours are infamous for their dense chakra. She snorted at something before saying, I recall Minato once saying that only 2 clans in existence have the ability to reliably contain me. The Uzumaki and Kagaya. Although even during the time of the first Hokage that clan was dwindling. Why would such a strong clan be getting smaller though? Wouldn't they be powerful enough to protect themselves? Not all shinobi prize peace. The Kagaya clan was well known for its bloodlust. Few could match it. Eventually they made so many enemies that they were overwhelmed. That's sad. Naruto frowned and scratched his cheeks, which were itching a bit. The feeling was odd but surprisingly pleasant. Kurama's voice seemed to lower in slight disappointment. It is, I suppose, now do me a favor and do a self-inventory. I want to see how my other tinkering went. Self what? Just look at yourself. Naruto was puzzled by her insistence and lifted his hands to examine them. His eyes bugged out. The tips of his finger had changed. Instead of the thin nail there was a tiny claw. About half an inch long and sharp. They were white as bone. He was quite unable to keep his shock from coming out louder than he intended. What? Shush, get out of bed and find a mirror. And try not to scream before I teach you how to hide your appearance. He swung his feet out of bed and heard a few soft clicks. Looking down he saw his feet bore claws as well. With a rising panic Naruto searched for a mirror but found none in the immediate area. Instead he opened the door to the bathroom and looked there. Immediately he caught his reflection in the mirror. He froze. At 13 years old he still had much of the baby fat of a child, lending his face a round shape. His tanned skin showed the amount of time he spent outside training. The 3 whisker marks were still there though they looked slightly darker and thicker. What truly caught his eye were his eyes. The blue remained, but the pupils were just like Kurama's. As he leaned forward he noticed fangs sticking out of his open mouth. He smiled into the mirror. His canines were long and sharp, pearly white and a bit scary. Naruto thought absently, could have made my eyes red, you know, that would have been cooler, or orange. Orange really? Yeah. Orange, my favorite color, believe it. She sighed. I can make them red, but it's just another thing you will have to hide. Inwardly the fox was pleased though. She didn't expect him to accept the changes she'd made so readily. The claws were valuable as they would make his taijutsu more deadly. The newly heightened senses would be priceless as a shinobi, and that was perhaps the easiest thing to improve at the moment. If only she could give him her sensory abilities, but that would require years to accomplish. Your village isn't likely to find them appealing as you. Naruto nodded. Okay, well. Don't be so impatient, kid. He waited, anticipating the change, not blinking. Then slowly his eyes darkened, turning black for a moment before brightening to an arterial red. He grinned. Now my eyes are just like yours. Was that what you wanted? I'm flattered. He could almost hear her smiling at that. His ears dropped. Guess I can't ask for a tail, huh? I'm not sure I could hide that from anyone. Kurama apparently thought the same because she suggested. Let's see if you can pull off an advanced transformation before we go giving you extra appendages. By the way, you should take a look at your ears, I couldn't help myself on that score. Huh? Naruto tilted his head down and realized that his human ears were gone. Holy, are these real? Of course. And they're more effective on top of your head than on the sides. They can swivel unlike human ears which don't move at all. And much cuter. He nodded and searched for anything else that was abnormal. Nothing struck him as unusual now. Naruto turned away from the mirror and walked back into the main room. He was still dressed in his regular outfit thankfully, but he didn't know if he was supposed to wait for anyone to check up on him. It's good that no one is there. Let me show you how to do a long-lasting transformation before some poor nurse dies of shock. I wouldn't think about it. The demon child walks out of a room with red eyes, fox ears, claws and fangs. If someone didn't try to kill you, I'd be shocked. From what you showed me of your memories, you must be careful. I can supply you with enough chakra that no one will be able to dispel the illusion, but many high-ranking shinobi will still be aware that it is there. So be cautious. Okay. I will, but I can't keep it going all the time, right? She went silent for a moment. When you sleep I have more power to affect you. I will do my best to funnel enough chakra to keep it going even while you sleep. Otherwise it would be an excellent idea to put your mind to work, thinking up a new jutsu for just that purpose. Naruto nodded and waited as a series of images and feelings ran through his mind, detailing how to perform the jutsu. It took a while for him to get it right and cover all the areas, but soon enough Naruto stood as normal as never. He grinned at his success just as his ears registered the door opening. He looked to the side as the door halted and Hiruzen walked in. Naruto's face split into a grin as he ran to hug the old man. Hiruzen embraced his warmly, chuckling at the strength. Then he heard a few ribs crack ominously before Naruto finally let go. He grunted and straightened. I'm glad you're feeling better, Naruto. Tell me what happened. I was having nightmares and I didn't sleep for a long time, but I'm all better now that Naruto. He hesitated and realized he'd almost gone right ahead and told the old man about Kurama. He grinned and scratched the back of his head, haha anyway, I'm much better now. How long was I out? Hirizin's eyes flickered for the briefest moment with suspicion. Then he smiled. No more than a day and a night. I'm honestly surprised you recovered so quickly. Kakashi told me you fainted from exhaustion, but I suppose you're tougher than most. He bent down. But if these nightmares start again you can come to me, alright? I'll always be around when you need someone to talk to. Okay, he sighed and groaned faintly. Now I believe you might do well for some ramen. How about I take a break from my paperwork and have lunch with you? Naruto blinked in amazement. Really, that was the first time the old man had ever offered to go along with him. The first time he might be able to walk down the street without anyone cursing him. With Gramps there he couldn't do wrong. Kurama's voice came through warningly. Naruto-kun. Remember that his duty is to the village first, not to you. Don't tell him about me. He wouldn't believe you, and even if he did, he wouldn't trust me. He didn't know of my relationship with your parents. Don't worry, I won't. AM heard the flap to the ramen stand pulled aside but didn't bother turning around. It was probably Naruto. Well, it was almost always Naruto. The boy almost single-handedly made up half of their profit. And considering that he didn't have any real income, that was a feat in and of itself. But maybe she should have taken him to the market one of these days. Ramen every single day couldn't be healthy. She smiled as she heard the usual call. AM-chan. One miso ramen please. Turning around she nodded and stopped dead. Two dark eyes hovered over an amused smile. Her lips moved, but it was a few seconds before any sound came out. Lord Hokage. Hiruzen chuckled. Well, it's good to hear that at least some of the new generation know my title, Naruto. He nudged the boy with an elbow, managing to make him grin sheepishly. Yeah, well, I'd rather call you by your name than just calling you Hokage, but your name is Kinda. The old man raised an eyebrow in mock anger. And exactly what is my name, if I may be so bold as to ask? Naruto glanced away. Old. AM looked horrified until Hiruzen laughed. I guess you're back to your old self already. He turned his gaze on the young cook. That'll be one beef ramen for me. The old Kage patted Naruto on his messy blonde head. Come now, take a seat, Naruto-kun. The young ramen chef just nodded dumbly as the two of them took their stools. Coming right up. A while and a great many bowls of ramen later, Hiruzen waved slowly to Naruto as the blonde sped off through the village. His smile wavered then fell, his eyes turning serious. Something was off about the boy. He could feel the wrongness that made him seem unclean. The Sandaime turned and walked back to the tower, thinking on what he had seen. An illusion, I'm quite sure of it, but Naruto couldn't possibly have made it. Even though his grades at the academy were sabotaged by Mizuki, he still has no talent in Jinjutsu, thanks to his Jinchuriki status, so how does he come to have such a powerful one clinging to him? Sarutobi was concerned, to say the least. Such a powerful illusion should have been obvious to all but a few dim civilians. The sheer amount of chakra that was being used to sustain it meant that it couldn't easily be dispelled. And despite that, he'd only noticed it when he'd nudged Naruto. The entire walk to the ramen stand and their talk in the hospital, he hadn't noticed it at all. And that was what truly concerned him. His thoughts grew ever darker as his mind worked double time to unravel the mystery. I must be getting old, maybe I'll get Danzo to send one of his root members to keep a close eye on him. At least I know Danzo's methods and his forces are terrifyingly loyal. The old man sighed as he walked, wondering if life was getting more complicated or if he was just becoming too slow to keep up. Naruto was almost to his apartment when he changed course. His excitement after his talk with the old man needed release. And the easiest way to achieve that was through training. His feet took him away from his home and back towards training field 44. He'd found it months ago and it was his favorite hangout. The dark forest was filled with all manner of huge animals and beasts, which was why it was so perfect. He hadn't seen a single person besides himself there in all the times he'd gone to train. He suspected it was because of the animals and the eerie feel of the place. Well, he didn't know about eerie. It was just a forest. No ghosts lived there or anything like that. And all the animals tended to avoid him. He'd only been attacked once, and as far as he was concerned, giant spiders were no problem. Naruto looked around, making sure no one was watching before he sprinted forward and leaped the metal fence which bordered the forest's edge. Inside it was dark and shadowed, with only small patches of light showing through. But it was as close to home as he could get outside his cramped apartment. He sped through till he found his personal training area. It was a large clearing he'd cleared of grass. It tended to be damp here, and he didn't like slipping all over the place. 3 massive trees bordered the clearing, each as wide as a house. On one of them he'd scraped off a good deal of bark and wood, leaving a smooth surface. He'd carved his training regimen and what his physical limits were into the wood, so he didn't have to keep track in his head. Naruto ran over and pulled out his kunai, scratching another day into the worn surface. Then he sat down with his back to the tree and closed his eyes. He tried to reach out with his mind, but nothing happened. Well, that didn't work. How do I get there? Kurama asked curiously. What are you trying to do? Boy. Kurama. I was trying to get to where I could talk to you again, but I didn't know how. She was pensive for a moment. There is a special kind of meditation that you humans invented which allows you to fall inside your subconscious. For those of great mental fortitude, it gives them a place where they can think and train for years without spending a single day in the outside world. Cool. However, for Jinchuriki it works differently. Instead of taking you to the core of yourself, it brings you to where your mind and the mind of the best connect. For us it is the seal. That is where you saw me. A room that touches both of our minds and binds us together. Naruto thought, so how do I get to see you again? Do you really want to see me or do you merely wish to ask me something? Well, both. Very well. However, you don't yet have the skill or patience to come to me on your own. But I can bring you here of my own accord. Naruto was about to answer her when he felt himself falling fast. A second later he was sitting on warm stone. He looked around. Huh? How did I? Welcome back, Naruto. Now what did you wish to ask? Kurama's tone was curious and playful. I assume there is something important you wanted if you had to talk to me face to face. Naruto turned around and saw Kurama lounging against one of the cage bars again. Her attire had changed. Instead of her being stark naked like before, she wore a long white kimono with blood-red trim. He scratched his head nervously. Actually, I wanted to see you. I mean, what I wanted to ask and seeing you was two different things. She quirked one eyebrow. So you wanted to see me just to see me, but you also have a question. Very well. What is it you want to know? He paused for a moment. It was just that I was thinking when I was sitting with Gigi that he trailed off. At what? That I'm a genin, but only barely. I mean, you said I had a lot of chakra and Kage Bunshin take a lot of chakra. I thought that the only reason I beat Mizuki was because of that. I don't know if I'm ready to be a genin. Kurama smiled. Well, to be perfectly honest, Kushina could have handed your head to you on a silver platter even at 10 years old. 30 years ago, training for Konoha Shinobi was much more intensive. Despite your talent with clones, the fact that you were held back by your mentors means you still aren't as strong as you should be. Her ears dropped a bit. Again, it's my fault that I didn't find a way to speak to you sooner. Naruto noticed her saddened look and frowned. Is there any way you can make me stronger? I don't want to be dead weight with the team. I know Sasuke is an ass and all, but he's really good with taijutsu and ninjutsu. And Sakura has great chakra control. I just have a lot of power, but I can't use it very well. I can. Great. So you can TR. But everything has a cost, Naruto. I can give you incredible hearing, but human ears aren't designed for it. That is why fox ears were needed. I can give you an excellent sense of smell, but because you have a human nose I have to rework how your senses are perceived by your brain and how the chakra flows through you. Yeah, but, she sighed, you must understand that I have chakra control that far surpasses any of the Kage. However, changing your body is extremely difficult. A change in eye color is simple and quick because it does not change how you see, ears not so much, and giving you a keen sense of smell is even harder. Actively changing your chakra network. He pouted. So you can't make me stronger. Don't give me those eyes, kid. I can do anything. However, the seal severely limits how much chakra I can use. Meaning that the less chakra I have circulating through your body, the longer it will take to change anything. So how can you? In order to drastically affect any part of you, I need more of my chakra running through the area than you. My chakra, despite being a part of you since birth, is still my chakra and it doesn't mix well with yours. It is the same problem that users of medical ninjutsu have. The body will always try to reject foreign chakra even if it is helping. Naruto sat back, thinking it over. So she can make me stronger, but it just takes a long time. Or what about elements? Sasuke can do fireball jutsu, but I can't use anything like that. Kurama, can you give me control over elements and stuff? Like how Sasuke can use fire when the other kids in class can't. She smiled. I can do that. As I already said, I can use most of the jutsu you humans can, excluding some lightning, water, and all of earth style. It sounds like you can only do like half. Kurama scowled. Silence, kid. I am greatly diminished from my full power. An entire half of my chakra is gone. You try doing jutsu after someone cuts you in half. What do you mean by missing half of your power? Simply this. The Yondaime thought I had gone insane. He wasn't about to seal me in my entirety into his son. It would have been a death sentence for you. Instead, he sealed the yang half of his chakra into you. And sealed the yin half into himself moments before his death. You see, Naruto, a shinobi's elemental affinity is often limited to the balance of their yin and yang chakra, which is in turn often hereditary. She brought her hand forward and the floor between them began to change, a diagram appearing before them. Yin chakra is every bit as important and strong as yang chakra. However, because I am made up exclusively of yang chakra, certain elements are drastically more difficult for me. Earth style is the domain of the yin chakra. Those ninja who had overwhelmingly more yin chakra than yang often become powerful earth users. Naruto leaned forward as the diagram moved with her words, forming a pentagram with the 5 elements arranged according to their association with either of the chakra types. Each type of chakra had a primary focus and 2 secondary focuses. For instance, yang chakra's primary elemental focus is wind, followed by lightning and fire. While yin chakra's primary focus is earth, followed by water and fire. Ah. That means I would be great with wind, right, because you're all yang chakra and our chakra is connected, so I'd have way more yang chakra than anything else. She smirked. Right, you are. Because of your massive imbalance in yang chakra, you would have an equal affinity for wind release, although it isn't guaranteed. What do you mean by that? I mean I have to have wind with all of that, right? Your elemental affinity isn't entirely dependent on the balance of yin and yang chakra. Your blood decides your elemental affinity. For example, I believe your father's main affinity was either wind or lightning, with his secondary affinity being the other. As for Kushina, I believe she had a minor affinity for fire and a massive one for water. Although she always kept me under such a tight watch. She sighed once more and continued. Now if you inherited Kushina's elemental affinity, that means you will have a massive affinity for fire, the likes of which hasn't been seen in decades if not centuries, but if you gained Minato's, it could be the same either way. As both wind and lightning are strong on the yang side of the spectrum. Naruto sat there for a moment thinking. So that probably means I'll be real bad at earth release. Unfortunately, yes. Very much so. It won't be impossible for you to learn it, but it certainly wouldn't be easy. And water release won't be easy either. But you're lucky either way. Most shinobi only have an average affinity for one element. You have a good chance for a strong affinity in 2. So can you train me in them, or I mean, find out what they are first and then train me? He was bursting at the thought of having personal training sessions with the Kyuubi. It would be beyond anything he could have hoped for. Forget Kakashi. He was being taught by Kurama, like being trained by one of the cage, but all the time and better. She leaned forward and caught his hand, dragging him into her lap. Naruto didn't resist, but shifted to get comfortable. Kurama giggled a bit as he accidentally grabbed one of her tails. Now I'll try to determine your affinity. It shouldn't take very long. Just close your eyes for me, Naruto. He did so and waited. Kurama's body was very warm as if she radiated heat. It was almost tempting to doze off, but he still wanted to train. Unbeknownst to him, Kurama's face had twisted into a frown of concentration. For some reason, I'm finding it rather difficult to find his affinity, perhaps my vision is too focused. I'm just looking for 3 elements. It's entirely possible he has a talent for water release only. I've seen stranger things. A few minutes passed and Naruto was starting to wonder if she was going to stop stroking his hair. As much as he enjoyed the attention, it was a bit distracting. He almost jumped out of her lap as she let out a clear laugh, like a chorus of bells. Ah, my kid. How lucky we are to be you. It seems you are rather special if I do say so myself. He twisted around to look her in the face. She was grinning broadly. What do I have? 3 things, one of which I didn't expect and a second which amazes even me. You have 3 affinities, that in and of itself is special. I'd say only 5% of shinobi are born with 3, however, that isn't what makes it special. Well. Are you going to tell me? Come on, Kurama. Settle down, young one. I'll save the best for last. First, let me tell you that you have a slightly above average affinity for water, obviously from your mother. However, you also have what shinobi call bloodline. What's that? Bloodline sounded really cool and powerful. He thought it sounded a bit familiar too, like Shizuka had mentioned it in class when he was half asleep. It is usually passed down from generation to generation. And if the parent has a bloodline trait, the child will almost always have the same. However, the reason it took me so long is that I've never actually met someone with this one. She eyed him mischievously. You have matching affinities, as in they are perfectly equal in strength for wind and lightning. I've heard of many combination ninjutsu for those 2 at once, but in my entire life I've never met someone with a genuine bloodline. Naruto was ecstatic. What's it called? Kurama flicked her tails in thought. She seemed to be thinking about what it was. I didn't tell him the truth, I just know that he wouldn't be able to restrain himself. Minato had the Kekijinkai for wind and lightning, although he kept it a secret from almost everyone. And Kushina was brilliant when it came to her fire techniques, but to have inherited all 3 and equally. To be born with the first Kekkei Toda in decades and only the 4th in recorded history. I'm not sure how he'd take it. She tilted her head, looking down at his excited face, wondering just what to say. If he went blabbing to someone, he could get himself in serious trouble. As in Uzumaki, he was prime real estate already. And as soon as the village revealed who his father was, he'd have every family in Konoha throwing their daughters at him. Not only was he royalty, but he had 2 of the most famous clans in his lineage. To add a Kekijinkai would just be overkill. He'd have to worry about arranged marriages and political alliances. Even with what she'd told him, he might still be targeted for kidnapping. Kumo was notorious for that sort of thing, and Iwa wasn't much better. If anyone found out that he had a Keke Toda, it would be painting a bull's eye on his back. Even smaller villages would risk war for the chance to wield a power like that, not to mention her. Son of the 4th Hokage and one of the last Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and possessing the rarest bloodline in history to date. There would be absolutely no chance for peace. Even if there wasn't a minor war over him, he'd be dogged by everyone and their second eldest daughter. It wasn't in the least bit helpful that he was going to look just like his father when he was older. Once he shed his skin as a weakling, the girls would be chasing him, clan and bloodline or not. Kurama smiled and patted Naruto on his head, rubbing between his foxy ears. He almost purred, making a happy rumble in his chest. It's a lesser version of something called plasma release, Naruto. It's beyond rare. As far as I know, the true version is completely extinct. She grabbed hold of his face with both hands, bringing his soft crimson eyes close to her own. I need you to promise that you won't tell anyone about this. I promise to train you, but you must not reveal this ability. He looked forlorn. But why, Kurama? She pulled him into a hug. Because I say so, okay? I don't want you to get hurt. Others will try and steal you from here and take your powers for their own. Naruto's hands brushed over one of her tails as he craned his head back to look in her eyes. They would do that anyway to take me from you. So promise that you'll keep this between us two. Naruto had closed his eyes once again. I promise. And Naruto Uzumaki never goes back on his word. She smiled as he closed his eyes, letting head fall on her shoulder. Soon he fell asleep. He seems to like it here. Perhaps he's growing too attached to me. If this keeps up, he won't be able to sleep without coming here. One hand rose to touch the tips of his ears. Naruto, I wonder what your parents would say with me deciding to raise you now. Would they understand? I think Minato might, but Kushina would be jealous. Kurama smiled slightly and relaxed. A little rest wouldn't hurt right now. I doubt anyone will come here anyway, so the henge can drop for now. She closed her eyes and drifted off. Mist clung to the beach as a ship slowly approached the shore. It moved silently, its engine off and oars muffled with rags. No one could know of its approach. That was imperative. If the loyalists found out about the supply run, they would be living of water and emergency rations. And while water was in great supply, food was not. After several minutes, the prow nudged into the soft sand. Standing at the shore was a man. He was tall with gray-blue hair and a severe expression. Without a word, he raised his hand and motioned his forces forward. Their camp was half a day to the north. They needed to smuggle the supplies inland before the dense mist was burnt off near midday. If they weren't finished by then, there would be nothing they could do but continue on, despite the fact that they'd be sitting ducks. After a short while, his men returned with their packs filled to bursting with the supplies they needed, desperately needed, he might add. The leader of the rebellion was a woman of many talents. Creating food out of thin air wasn't one of them. He just wished that something would go right for once. He gestured for them to move out. Then he activated his Dojutsu before setting out in the lead position. Naruto grunted as he finished his set of 300 push-ups. Sweat poured down his face as he forced himself into a backwards roll, flipping to his feet at the end of the maneuver. He landed and managed to keep from stumbling. He reflected that training for almost 6 hours was one of the last things he'd envisioned when Kurama talked about training his wind affinity. However, that was exactly what she had in mind. Naruto still remembered her words to him. Naruto, you should always remember that it is the training you do after you are exhausted that makes the difference. Until you feel like you can't move anymore, you will train. Up until that point, everything you do is a warm-up. Her grin had been feral. Once you feel as though the weight of the world is on your shoulders, then I will spar with you. Naruto ran forward and jumped up, grabbing a hold of a thin tree branch, easily 20 feet in their air. He hung suspended for a moment. Then he hauled himself up till his chin met the branch and repeated. It was arduous, tedious, and seemed like a roundabout way of increasing his affinity to wind. A humorous chuckle echoed from the back of his mind, making him shiver slightly. Tedious, am I? Maybe I won't show you one of the great styles I have had the privilege to learn over my long life. There are so many more inferior styles. Perhaps you should try something at genin level before you attempt to master a jonin level Taijutsu style. Naruto grimaced and continued to pull himself level with the branch, his muscles straining. No, I want to learn something worthwhile. There's no point in learning a Taijutsu that I'll discard in a few years, right? She chided him gently. No, Naruto. The more styles you know, the better. While mastering one great technique may be useful and quite deadly, it is another thing entirely to be skilled with 3 or 4 different styles. With 4 you have variety and the opportunity to change mid-battle should things turn sour. He didn't acknowledge her that time, choosing instead to continue at a faster pace. Once he was finished with this set, she had promised to show him the basics of Mito Uzumaki's infamous Taijutsu style, Reaper's Dance. Kurama said that it was the signature Taijutsu style of the Uzumaki clan royalty. That in and of itself made him ecstatic to learn it. At first he'd asked if she knew his father's style. She admitted that while she knew what it looked like she couldn't teach him. That had been a major letdown, but he kept a stiff upper lip and buckled down on memorizing what Kurama could teach him. For now she explained that she had 6 styles she could show him. The first was the Reaper's Dance. This was heavily dependent on footwork and extreme agility. However, it was also quite taxing to learn. Therefore his body had to be hardened. He was strong for his age, but he was still only 13. True strength training would take a while to accomplish. The second style she knew was called the Crimson Step. She explained that this required masterful precision that only the most dedicated warriors could acquire. It also used the circular movements and extreme power that most Uzumaki had bred into them. This, she said, would be the easiest to learn and the hardest to master. However, as with all the techniques she knew, it was an old style from a nearly extinct clan. He'd have the advantage since no one would have any ability to predict his movements. It took a half an hour to finish the last set. He hurriedly let go of the branch and fell to the ground, narrowly avoiding a sprained ankle. He sighed and walked over to mark off training for the day. It had been 2 days since he was released from the hospital. As of yet, Kakashi hadn't come to start the test yet. Naruto guessed they were still worried about him. The old man kept inquiring about any strange dreams he might have had. Naruto smiled at that. His dreams had been untroubled since Kurama had begun letting him sleep by the seal with her. He rarely even remembered what he dreamed of, which in comparison to the visions granted in days and months before, was blissfully peaceful. He wouldn't have traded anything for Kurama's companionship. She was friend, mentor, conspirator, maybe even mother a bit. Naruto paused as Kurama hummed lightly. Mother Hakashina wouldn't be too happy to hear that. But I suppose that is how you've started to treat me. I won't object to you referring to me as Ka-chan. He held his breath as she drew the words out. If you want, Naruto-kun. It's fine right now, Kurama. Anyway, could you bring me to the seal now? I'm ready. I see. Give me a moment, please. Naruto closed his eyes and felt himself fall once more into the seal chamber. Kurama was waiting for him, having changed her appearance once more. Her kimono was looser and shorter, allowing for a better range of movement. Instead of red trim, the entire garment was a dark maroon. Now Naruto. This taijutsu style is rather dangerous to the user as well as the opponent. It was designed, if I remember correctly, as a counter to her husband's signature style. Hashirama Senju style was later passed down to his descendants and was adopted as the Senju clan's preferred taijutsu technique. Naruto scratched his head. So this isn't a Senju style. No, of course not. Keeping in tradition with the spiral movements of the Uzumaki's fighting techniques, Maiko Uzumaki made sure it was based on circular movements. The Reaper's Dance requires the use of 2 long swords of one kind or another. Double-edged would be preferable, but the standard katana will be sufficient for learning the forms. She saw that he had a question. Yes, Naruto-kun. Well, it's just been bothering me for a while since you told me about it. Wouldn't this be a kenjutsu since it uses swords? Technically, but no. It is more of a mix between the two. There is just as much hand-to-hand in this style as there is sword play. How he was very confused. If you have a sword in both hands. Did you know there is a man in Kumo who uses 8 swords simultaneously? Naruto's jaw dropped. How? That isn't important. He can use 8 swords with only 2 hands. What makes you think you can't pummel someone to death with your fists and still use 2 blades? Or 4 or 6? The blonde looked baffled for a moment and then nodded. He closed his eyes and focused on the mindscape around him, forming it into weapons. They wouldn't cut him or Kurama, but within his mind they had weighed and felt real enough. Kurama nodded in approval. Very good, now come here. I can't show you the movements from there. Naruto walked between the bars of the huge cage seal and stood opposite of her. She stepped forward, moving to his side. He watched as 2 blades materialized out of thin air, seeming to flow from her hands. He gulped nervously. Are those made out of your chakra? Yes, Naruto-kun, and these will cut you even here. The blades you carry are a simple mental manifestation, without true solidity. You aren't skilled enough to form a blade out of pure chakra regardless. Okay. Follow my movements, Naruto, and try to keep up. I know you're tired, but it will help your muscles memorize the movements, and besides you'll be sparring with me afterwards, so you have a lot of incentive to get it right. Kakashi knew that there was something wrong the moment he saw Naruto arrive at training field 7. 3 days had passed since he's postponed the genin acceptance test on account of Naruto's mysterious ailment. And now here he was as if absolutely nothing had ever happened. He was back to his unpredictable self, or more to the point his overenthusiastic knucklehead self. Kakashi wondered if he'd ever understand Naruto's boundless energy. He was able to literally exude an aura of anticipation. As it was, his chakra was giving his skin a soft blue glow. It made the white-haired Jonin rather queasy watching him. Kakashi's visible eye focused on the blonde bundle of energy more intently. There was something off about him, as if the way he looked wasn't natural. Although it was more likely as though his true appearance was hidden. Kakashi thought tiredly, it's probably a henge, but why he would have such a strong illusion placed over him is beyond me. He idly considered peeking at Naruto with his Sharingan. That was guaranteed to show him what was beneath the false features. But if I do that, then Sasuke will start badgering me about my taijutsu, and then it will be one long argument over exactly how I got it and why he should have it instead. Twerp. He sighed as his hand strayed to the pouch on the back of his belt, but no icha was currently disallowed. He cursed under his breath and smiled. His students of course couldn't see this kind and loving gesture on account of his mask. Even if he hadn't been wearing a mask, they probably wouldn't have noticed. Naruto's exuberance had found new direction, mainly in goading Sasuke. Kakashi sighed more loudly for effect and interrupted their impromptu argument. Okay. That's enough for now you two. Today we are finally going to proceed with the bell test. One blank stare and two slightly annoyed looks were all the answer he received. Kakashi mentally prepared himself for the certainty of them failing. This test was supposed to teach teamwork, and as it stood now, he doubted there were many universes where they could possibly succeed. Kakashi imagined Minato's test when he, Obito, and Rin were first made genin. It was the same test through and through well, except for the skipping breakfast part. He seemed to remember that they had only passed by accident. I wouldn't doubt that they fail. Sakura might have a head on her shoulders, but she's just wandering around searching for someone to give her orders. Sasuke is too arrogant to give her any and will probably go off alone. That'll leave the blonde troublemaker to try and take me on single-handed. Kakashi once again had to restrain himself from looking stupid as he prepared to explain the test to them. Pretending to close a book when he didn't actually have one in hand would be stupid. Once again he mentally cursed Sakura's mother and his gracious Hokage. Then he got down to business. Right you three, this is how the test works. I have two bells right here. He held them up for them to see. And it's your job to get them off me. Use any means necessary. Naruto and Sasuke both grinned, making a slight chill go down the older man's spine. The evil light in their eyes making him rethink his original strategy. Now here's what makes it interesting. I'm giving you guys 4 hours to complete this task. If you don't have a bell by then you'll skip lunch and I'll tie you to one of those wooden stumps over there while you watch your teammates eat. After that you'll have until diner to get one of the bells. The eye smiled. If you don't have one by then back to academy you go. Kakashi pointed with a hand holding the bells to an alarm clock behind them. Even as they watched a hand moved slightly and a long ring echoed through the clearing. Kakashi saw the blur of movement as all three disappeared. Well this is rather unexpected. Naruto hid in the shadows, concealing his presence as best as he could. Kurama was helping by withdrawing a good deal of her chakra from his system, significantly reducing his presence to any sensor. He peered out at Kakashi, wondering exactly how to handle him. He needed a bell but how to get it. I could attack from behind, but I don't think I can do it without him noticing me. I ain't that quiet. Or maybe I could throw a kunai and miss on purpose, maybe snick one of the bells. Or I might wait until Sasuke or Sakura makes a move and go in for the kill while he's distracted. Hey Naruto, a voice whispered past his ear quiet enough that only he could hear it. Naruto's head snapped to the side and he saw Sasuke on the same branch as him. Sasuke. The dark-haired boy nodded to him. Good spot. He was referring to his hiding place. Naruto was slightly disbelieving. Was that a compliment? The emo king never gave praise to anyone, even himself, unless he was talking about how great the Uchiha were. He shook his head and nodded back. Thanks, I'm guessing you want to do this together. Sasuke looked out to where Kakashi had his back to them. His eyes narrowed as he whispered, I'm the strongest student from our class, but I'm not stupid. Kakashi is a jonin for a reason. All three of us couldn't take him out together. But just to get one of the bells maybe. He didn't sound too sure of himself, but Naruto mentally smirked at the thought that he was considering teamwork. Usually that was the last thing on his mind. Should we try and get Sakura's attention? Personally he thought that was a lost cause, and Kurama agreed with him on that. The Uchiha's dark eyes flicked towards him. Hell no. She's as useless as art to the blind. I would have got her attention before you, but she only graduated because of academics. You beat a Chunin. The boy smirked. You might be a dope, but you have the same drive as I do. Otherwise you'd be dead. Naruto couldn't help but agree with him. So how do we take him down? I don't think anything direct will take him off guard. Me neither. Sasuke went silent for a while. Do you have any offensive jutsu? Naruto paused. Should I tell him, Kurama? Kurama sounded slightly exasperated. Go ahead, but you need to lie about your training. Learning a C-rank wind jutsu in 3 days would draw more attention than stealing the forbidden scroll again. Naruto glanced at Kakashi and spoke under his breath. I can use a couple. They're wind style. Sasuke was shocked and he asked louder than he intended, wind style? Really? Yeah. Only 2 of them are offensive and I really only mastered 1. What is it? Naruto shrugged. Wind hammer. There was a pause as Sasuke mulled over the information. Naruto watched his possibly future teammate carefully. He looked to be thinking a strategy through. Then a smirk twitched across his lips. "Hey Naruto, how good is your timing?" "As good as it needs to be. Believe it." Sasuke nodded to himself and twisted so that he could explain the plan he'd come up with. Kakashi stood in the same place as he had started out. Nothing was happening, nothing at all. Is this really going to be the whole day? Are they going to just sit out there and wait as their time ticks away until the alarm goes off? He groaned inwardly at the prospect. I'm sure that they wouldn't mind me reading to pass the time. He reached back and popped the cover on his back pouch. At that moment Sasuke appeared in the open area in front of him. The Uchiha heir stood there for a moment as if sizing him up. Then he started walking forward. Kakashi watched him curiously as Sasuke drew within 10 yards. "What are you thinking, Sasuke?" He drew a kunai and set into a recognizable stance. Kakashi knew it was a slant on one of the 3 great Uchiha Taijutsu styles. This one was called Dance of the Blooded Tiger. It utilized swift direct attacks on vital areas to kill or disable the enemy in that order. This could be interesting. Sasuke charged. They met in a clash of steel as Kakashi caught the blow on the metal pail of his gloves. He smiled inwardly. He has good strength, better than a normal genin for sure, but not quite Chunin level. And his timing is excellent. Sasuke's blade slid off the gauntlet even as Kakashi took a single step backwards, dodging the next lunge. They exchanged a couple blows, Kakashi making sure to keep his own reaction passive. He wasn't here to brutalize them. Just to let them work out the meaning of the test for themselves. He was a bit disappointed though. Even though he'd figured they wouldn't work together, he'd still hoped they would do so instinctively. Sasuke's attacks came quickly with a minimum amount of wasted effort, but he still needed to work on his reflexes. His movements were timed well. However, his body wasn't keeping up with some of his maneuvers. Then Kakashi felt something wrap around his hand. Shit, the second his single eye had closed, Sasuke had moved with all the speed he could muster and wrapped a long coil of high-grade ninja wire around his wrist. Kakashi tried to jump back but found the end of the line anchored in the hard-packed dirt. "This is a new one, keeping me pinned in place won't help though. Wait, what the?" Sasuke had dodged back and was running through several hand signs. No way he has enough chakra for that. He was wrong. Sasuke drew in a great breath, his small chest expanding as he filled his lungs with air and mixed it with a large quantity of fire chakra. Then he threw himself forward, exhaling at the same time. A stream of fire flew from his mouth, forming a huge fireball. It expanded till it was 6 feet across, then blasted towards him. Kakashi paled and went into action. Well, normally he wouldn't have been worried in the least about genin, there was one weakness he'd always had. Durability. He'd always been physically weaker and less tough than those his age and skill. Although he had superior speed, reflexes, and overall tactics to make up for it, there was only so much he could do one-handed against a strong fire jutsu. He hurriedly sent lightning chakra into the wire around his wrist, using high-frequency vibrations to weaken it. Then pulled hard and it snapped. In the next instant Kakashi leapt straight up, avoiding the fireball as it exploded. That was too close for comfort. I have to admit he's good. If I was a Chunin, that would probably have taken me out. Luckily I have more than a few ticks up my sleeve. Then Kakashi's eyes caught Sasuke rushing forward in the wake of his attack. Kakashi was still flying upwards from the force of his jump. Then he saw it. Naruto the blonde was rushing in from the other direction. Sasuke stopped short as Naruto jumped through the flames where his jutsu had impacted. "Naruto. Ready." Naruto nodded as he came to a screech halt. They both started to run, though hand signs. Kakashi realized he was in trouble. They were working together the entire time. How did I not notice him sneaking up behind me? Sasuke finished his hand signs at the exact same time as Naruto. Their faces craned upward as they shouted in unison, "Wind release. Wind hammer. Fire release. Grand fireball. Collaboration ninjutsu. Greater scorch blast." Sasuke's fireball swelled to huge proportions as he exhaled in Kakashi's direction. At the same moment, Naruto clapped his hands together, creating an explosive current of wind straight at him. The two attacks merged as they blazed towards him, the wind-style attack hitting the back end of the fire jutsu and flaring the red flames to a blinding white. Kakashi could feel the heat from where he was, drying his skin out in a split second. His thoughts raced through his options. Lightning was no good. He wasn't good enough with water either. All that was left was fire. This is going to take a ridiculous amount of chakra. He brought his hands together in the tiger sign and summoned every scrap of chakra he could on such short notice. Supreme Fireball. He blew hard, sending all the chakra he gathered directly in the path of their combination attack. His attack was far larger than theirs, but even so it nearly failed to stop it. They collided in mid-air, fighting for dominance for 3 seconds, then they exploded, sending a rain of fire down upon the training field. Naruto and Sasuke dodged out of the way while they both started throwing kunai and shuriken at him. Kakashi deflected any that came close to him, ignoring those that would sail past him. His feet touched the ground a second later as gravity decided he'd been flying too long. Kakashi felt a twinge from his calves and ankles. He'd never had to counter a combination attack like that, not in midair, not when he was already holding back, and certainly not when it was used by genin. It was a well-known fact that the sub-elements were many times more effective than singular elements. In the case of wind and fire it was even more deadly. Because it couldn't effectively be combated except by an extremely strong water-style jutsu or the reverse subgroup. And he didn't have any water-style jutsu that would have been usable while 30 feet in the air. So he was forced to use a purely fire jutsu to overpower their combination attack. And he needed nearly triple the usual amount of chakra to overcome the pseudo-scorch release jutsu. He honestly didn't know whether to be proud that they'd had a good 35% chance of killing him just then or pissed because they came close to killing him. Hell. This test wasn't even supposed to be a challenge for him. And he was even limiting himself to high chunin level abilities. Kakashi looked across to Naruto and Sasuke. His ears were still ringing slightly from the explosion, and besides that he looked down at his belt. Both bells were gone. He sighed, realizing that he could have been a bit more energetic when he was deflecting and dodging their missiles. Apparently a few of their attacks hadn't been to kill at all, but were aimed at the bells on his belt. He heard a girlish squeal and turned slightly. Sure enough, there was Sakura with the two bells in one hand running over to them. This is the first time any team has passed the test, I'll be damned. Kakashi wondered if this team had a hope to survive or even thrive after all. If they could pass his test, then he wouldn't have to worry about the problems that had torn his own squad apart. Naruto grinned at Sasuke, who he had to admit was an excellent partner. Between them they'd figured out the perfect plan for taking Kakashi on. Naruto hadn't expected to win even with that amazing combo, but he thought that it would show that they were both serious about being shinobi. Sasuke smirked back at him as if saying, "Nice work." Naruto grinned wider and then blinked as he saw Sakura running past Kakashi with the two bells in her hand. Hey. She has a use after all. He leaned in close to Sasuke and whispered, "Well, at least Sakura can fetch." The Uchiha's face went blank for a second before he was forced to restrain a chuckle. He brought his hand to his mouth and coughed, disguising it as Sakura reached them. She looked disheveled and rather worn out. If he'd walked in on them at that moment he would have sworn she did most of the fighting. "Sasuke-kun. I got the bells. One for you and one for me, right?" Both boys stiffened, their minds running along parallel lines. "Is she completely clueless?" Sasuke grunted as Sakura stopped in front of him and held out one of the bells. "Here you go, Sasuke-kun, that was amazing how you totally put sensei on the defensive like that. I bet you would have got him for sure if Naruto Baka didn't interrupt your jutsu." She shot a glare at Naruto. "But I got the bells, so at least we can go ahead to become genin." Naruto suddenly discovered a keen dislike for his teammate, one that hadn't been there before. What the fuck? She did not just say that and for Kami's sake. She fucking said it out loud in front of me. His eyes narrowed as Kurama muttered darkly in the back of his mind about killing insolent peasants. But before he could shout at her, Sasuke snatched both of the bells out of her hand. "You didn't do anything but pick them up off the ground after we got them off him. Naruto actually helped me. I thought you were useless before, but now there isn't any doubt." Sakura went abruptly pale. But you can't mean that." Sasuke closed his eyes as if seeking patience from some greater power. "If I didn't mean what I said, I wouldn't have said it. Unlike you who will say anything just to look good in front of me." He opened his eyes and took one of the bells from his hand and thumped it into Naruto's chest. "You are annoying me, insulting Naruto, and wasting both our time and our sensei's." He pushed Sakura aside and started towards Kakashi, who stood a little ways away listening. Naruto looked between him and Sakura, weighing things in his mind. A moment later he brushed past her as well, leaving the pincat to piece together her suddenly fragile psyche. He used to like Sakura. Maybe even a little crush at one point. But he'd lost a lot of respect that last year of academy. All the stupid fangirl shit and her blatant disrespect that went above and beyond the villagers' hatred. And then she goes and pulls a stunt like that. He could put up with a lot. And by a lot he meant a massive amount of abuse, scorn, and anger. But Sakura's mistreatment was far more personal than the village's overall hatred of him. She had decided to object to his existence simply because of his childish crush on someone who was obviously not interested. He couldn't understand it. He refused to understand it. And so he walked past her, deciding to focus on himself this time around. Hell, he might get to be friends with Sasuke. They both liked to train. It turned out that Sasuke wasn't as big an ass as he originally thought. Not to mention he lived alone. The two of them could actually train with each other without stupid family members trying to stop them. It was a win-win. He could get stronger and have a halfway decent friend, and he wouldn't have to deal with Sakura. If she was sent back to the academy, then he wouldn't have to deal with her anymore. "Serves her right for talking about my kid like that," Kurama growled in the back of his mind. "If I were in your shoes she would have a broken nose and a black eye right now. Bitch." He grimaced as he walked up next to Sasuke, who had just handed his bell to Kakashi. He placed his own on the Jonin's palm. Kakashi didn't know how to react. Naruto and Sasuke had basically just told Sakura to go jump off a cliff. That was not how a team was supposed to operate. And yet he had to admit Sakura was pathetic. Her goals were idiotic, her likes were fleeting, and her dislikes were unjustified. Even her skills were subpar, and to top all of that off, she was blatantly insulting. He didn't know how Naruto retrained the urge to knock her on her ass, even if he was glad that he didn't. If Sakura's mother found out that he let the demon hit her daughter, there would be hell to pay. He was sure it wouldn't be permanent, but the civilian council could make serious roadblocks when they wanted. Saya Haruno did have a loud voice in the council. Kakashi looked down at the bells in his hand before he closed his hand and stowed them in his pocket. He looked at them. Sasuke looked ticked off, but seemed to have put Sakura out of his immediate thoughts. Naruto, on the other hand, he seemed to be sad and angry at the same time. His face twitched every few seconds, showing the tension built up in him. What worried him was the aura he could once again feel as a tangible thing. It wasn't all excited this time though. It was more enraged. He cleared his throat. "I'll get back to you on this." He raised his voice so that Sakura could hear. "All three of you be back here 2 days from now at 7:30. Understood?" The two boys nodded before walking off in the same direction. Sakura just stood where they had left her, shell-shocked. Kakashi took a deep breath and walked over. He needed to do some damage control before Sakura went home to cry on her parents' shoulders. Troublesome. He paused mid-step. "Damn, I'm starting to sound like an Nara." Naruto and Sasuke walked together out of the training field before turning into the village. The guards nodded to them, but took note of the displeased looks on their faces. They walked through the village, not speaking until they reached the point where their paths diverged. Both of them stopped then. As if by mutual consent, they turned and shook hands. "You think we passed?" Naruto asked. "We better have." Sasuke muttered something under his breath before asking, "Do you want to come by the Uchiha compound to train sometime? I could use a sparring partner who isn't trying to coddle me." Naruto grinned, but it was more feral than kind. "Sure, Sasuke. It'll be good to spar with someone who isn't trying to kill me for real." Uchiha and Uzumaki shook once more before letting go and returning to their respective homes, Sasuke to the Uchiha compound and Naruto to his rundown apartment. Sasuke dropped into a chair as he thought about what had happened so far that day. It had been very full and it wasn't even lunch yet. First, he'd found that Naruto wasn't nearly as dense or unskilled as he was made out to be. Although after he was told that Naruto took on a Chunin and won, he'd had serious doubts about how much truth the rumors held. Second, he'd discovered that he and Naruto shared a talent for battle strategy. The blonde was badly undereducated, but he caught on quickly and he thought way out of the box. As far as he was concerned, that made him worth 10 of Sakura. And speaking of Sakura, that was the third event of the morning. He had lost any and all respect he had for her. She was dead weight. He couldn't believe that she could be blind enough not to recognize that he and Naruto were working together. And not only that, but to go up and say that, did she not understand how her words could hurt others? He'd seen the look in Naruto's eyes. That smile fading as the equivalent of a 10-ton door slammed shut on his emotions. He knew what Naruto was feeling. It might not have had the same cause, but Naruto was as close as he could get to someone who understood him. And it royally pissed him off to listen to that useless excuse for a kunoichi bag on him like that. "If she doesn't get sent back to the academy, I'm going to have to talk to the Hokage. He never coddled me or treated me as some piece of delicate porcelain. He'd understand that she shouldn't be a ninja. Not with the way she acts. It would be putting me in danger, Naruto and Sensei too. All she has to do is make some rookie mistake or say something idiotic and we'd be done for." Sasuke grimaced and stood to go into his room. That last jutsu had taken a lot out of him. He needed a good rest before he overused a fire jutsu again. His eyes closed as he lay down on his bed. Naruto didn't stay at his apartment for long. After a moment of feeling both furious and, if it made any sense, somewhat satisfied, he decided to go train. He thought about it as he made his way to the forest of death. Anger was still boiling inside him. Rage from the mistreatment that always, no matter what he did, seemed to follow. And at the same time, he felt good that he and Sasuke had worked something out. It would be great to be able to spar with someone who was better than him, but still couldn't and wouldn't hold back. Unlike fighting a Chunin or Jonin, someone who could simply decide to end it, Sasuke would actually have to work hard if he wanted to keep up. It would put both of them on their toes at all times, since their fighting level was so close together. And he was just fine with that. He might even teach the Uchiha a thing or two. Naruto landed a few minutes later in the clearing where he usually trained, immediately going to the other side and marking the day off on the tree. The day before, he'd bought a little calendar and pinned it in place so he could better keep track. And beside that was a little timer. Kurama had suggested getting one for when she wasn't supervising him. That was another great thing about his inner demon. She had absolute time and direction, meaning she always knew exactly what time it was down to the second, and she could always tell you what direction was what. It was extremely useful, especially when navigating places like the Forest of Death where everything could seem the same. Kurama sighed. Speaking about things that are great, you know what would really hit the spot right now? I don't know the village. Aw. That's cruel. He could almost hear the pout in her voice. Actually, it has been too long since I've tasted real food. Not that I ate much of anything in my unsealed state, she giggled then. No, I was thinking that I could do with a long torture session with my favorite little ninja. That's only little ninja to you, and what do you mean by torture? He wasn't exactly sure he liked the sound of that. Oh, it's really simple. Seeing how you just showed off a C-rank wind release jutsu with near-perfect mastery to a jonin who knows that you've never even been tested for your affinity, there will be repercussions. He was really starting to dislike where this was going. Therefore I feel the need to tear your little brain apart by explaining the tedious nature of events to come now, do sit down. This may take a while, and I don't intend of letting you out until I've beaten the lesson into your thick skull. Naruto paled slightly and walked over to sit with his back against a tree. He chose a position that would leave him with the least cramps when he woke up and let his eyes close. It was only a moment and he found himself sitting across from her with the great cage bars between them. Kurama looked to have changed her attire again. On this occasion she was wearing a dark orange kimono with darker blue trim that seemed to have a spiral design stitched in. He grinned. Great choice of color. A smirk curled the corner of her red lips. Don't think that your honeyed words will get you out of a tongue lashing today. I need you to understand your delicate position. I'm not really sure what that means. She sighed again and closed her eyes. Simply be quiet unless you have a meaningful question. Okay, but now to start off with I need to explain 3 things to you. The first is the purpose and the duties of the village's civilian council, the second is the importance of bloodlines and other such abilities, and the third is the existence of a man named Danzo. Danzo? Who's he? I'll explain about him last. She shifted to a better position and began. A long time ago, almost 5 human generations to be exact, Hashirama Senju, the first Hokage and the husband of my first container, put into place 2 sets of rules. These rules applied to 2 separate parts of the village. One for the ninja and the other for the civilians. The one pertaining to ninja was much longer and pertained to everything that remotely affected the shinobi of the village. Thus, because it is a military village, almost every aspect of the village is in some way connected to its shinobi forces. Naruto knew that. It was talked about in history at the academy. He didn't really know why she was making such a big deal out of it though. Kurama seemed to notice his indifference and sent of a burst of chakra to snick him in the forehead as she continued. Over the period of about 2 years, the people of the village who were not shinobi came to believe that this system was unfair. Because of the interwoven nature of the military and the villagers' daily lives, they saw it as unfair control over them. It began to sow the seeds of unrest. To combat this, Hashirama set up a secondary council, similar to the council of clan heads. Its duty was to see that the rights of the common folk were not trampled on. Kurama made a sour face. Control is a dangerous thing, and even more so in the hands of those who have never had power. The civilian council was made up of merchants, business owners, and a few influential heads of family. They made sure, just as Shadame intended, that those without shinobi abilities had some say in the village. However, they also looked after their own interests above and beyond that of the village. Merchants sought to expand trade between villages to increase their own wealth. To help this, they made it a requirement that all squads had to give credence to foreign ninja when outside the league for non-combative missions. Why would they want that? Wouldn't they? The purpose was so that there would be less conflict between villages, allowing the merchants to have better trade with the civilians in other nations. But it also crippled our effectiveness in sabotage missions. As you can probably guess, that one rule didn't destroy our ability to operate outside the land of fire, but 70 years of the civilian council has indeed made life very hard for shinobi. Instead of doing what we are told and our leaders being responsible, every genin, chunin, and jonin must weigh the consequences of their actions carefully. Because if they do something that hurts the villagers, then they can get in big trouble. Correct? And before you say it, I know full well how idiotic it is. Those who are being protected and benefiting from it should not have a say in how they are being defended. Merely grateful that they have such good fortune in the first place. Naruto was confused. So how does that hurt me? Because the civilians are shorter-sighted than any of the shinobi. The Kyuubi attack, as it's been branded, was the single worst thing to happen in recent memory. Because of that and the many lives that were lost, you, my container, are seen as a huge threat. Not only to the village should I be released, but to all of their precious pocketbooks. They will take every opportunity to distract you and make your life miserable. Few if any of them wouldn't celebrate your death. For shinobi it's bad enough. You are a living reminder of those they lost. To the villagers and the civilian council, you are a potential disaster. Kurama stood and turned away from him, pacing on the other side of the bars. Her tone was less than pleased. With that in mind, you also have extremely rare bloodlines. If they found out about your innate abilities they would attempt to have you used as breeding stock. She glanced back at him. The combination of lightning and wind affinities is so rare there isn't even an official name for the bloodline. You couldn't imagine the price on your head the moment one of the other villages finds out. Naruto had gone pale. Breeding stock. She nodded. Bloodlines can manifest out of thin air, but almost all bloodlines are transmittable through genetics. Your children will have at least a 50-50 chance of inheriting your Kekkei Toda. Much more if your mate shares one or more elements with you. Kurama looked almost mournful. There is nothing I can do to help in this regard. This is a gift and a curse. Your power may be unmatched in time, but there will always be those who seek you, hoping to steal it. The older you get, the more protection you will have because of your own increasing abilities and the strength of your allies, but you must be cautious, extremely cautious, that no one takes advantage of you. He felt like he'd been slapped. There had always been that hatred, but to know that the villagers might sell him down the road as a stud horse just for money was unthinkable. Did they not know he was human? That he was just like them? Naruto's mind caught then on her words. Wait, Kurama. You said I had a Kekkei Toda. What is that? She sat down again, her tails whipping around in minor agitation. A Kekkei Toda is the next level after Kekkei Jinkei. It is the equal mix of 3 elemental affinities. You have that and it will make you 20 times more valuable to the right people. But you said. I lied. You have 3 elements in perfect harmony. Wind, lightning, and fire. If I remember correctly, it's called plasma release. And it is even more devastating than its counterpart dust release, which is the only other known Kekkei Toda. Naruto was blown away. You mean only other Kekkei Todas as there is only one other guy with it? Kurama explained. Lord Mu, who was the previous Tsuchikage, was born with affinities for wind, fire, and earth. This became known as dust release, or particle style. It is centered around jutsu that destroy matter at a molecular level, literally disintegrating anything it touches. So far there is no known counter for his famed particle style. And his student, Inoki the fence-sitter, inherited his teachings. While Inoki wasn't born with the Kekkei Toda, he has the ability to use all 3 elements together and thus use a lesser version of the original. She smiled grimly and gestured to him with a languid motion of her hand. But you have plasma release, which is strong against dust release. Your fire and wind affinities would cancel out his, and then your lightning would tear through his earth style. All in all, what I am trying to tell you, Naruto, is that you have the most powerful bloodline in recorded history. Naruto sat running through it in his mind. It was several minutes before he asked, so when do you start training me to use it? She growled. Patience, kid. I'll get to that eventually. For now I need to promise that you won't reveal anything but your wind affinity until I tell you. He nodded. I promise. And Naruto Uzumaki never goes back on his word. That's the best I can hope for. Then Kurama motioned for him to come forward. He stood and walked up to her, sitting back down and letting her pull him into her embrace. Kurama purred slightly as he smoothed a hand over one tail. Now I imagine you need more insight into avoiding the pitfalls those stupid villagers will set up for you. She smiled slightly, dragging her fingers through his blonde hair, attempting to tame it into something more stylish, but failing. How about this? I'll get to work on adjusting your chakra network while you listen. Okay. She reached out for his chakra directly, circumventing the seal somewhat while she was in skin contact with him. Her energy flowed through his chakra network, slowly opening all the chakra pathways so that she could properly shift his coils into more advantageous positions. It was very slow work because she still couldn't use much of her power at once, but ever so slowly, she tweaked his body. As she did so she began to speak, telling him how to get out of certain situations and in general work around politics. Naruto sucked it all in without noticing that the cage around them was becoming less gloomy, more bright. Kurama closed her eyes, allowing her chakra to work its magic on him. Naruto's Uzumaki heritage was a greater gift than he could ever realize, something given to him by his ancestors. It was said that the best of the Kagaya clan could manipulate their bones with a thought, but the Uzumaki clan had a far more powerful ability, if less noticeable. Her Uzumaki could actually manipulate the chakra in their own bodies when it would normally act passively. They had the talent to open or close their chakra points, or even the 8 celestial gates. Some had used their abilities to literally rearrange their chakra network over a period of years, of course. In essence, Uzumaki could alter the way in which chakra normally flowed. Her previous container had the power to manifest chains of purple chakra. They were more than sufficient to hold tailed beasts down, even her. And that was one of the minor manipulations. Although, few Uzumaki had made use of external chakra conversion techniques as they were called. Kushina was just a bit more violent than most Uzumaki, which was truly saying something considering how inherently brutal the Uzumaki clan had been. Peaceful and vicious at the same time, Kurama subtly cut off Naruto's affinities to lightning and fire. She could keep them unconnected to the rest of his chakra network for 5 or 6 days without harming him or weakening the affinity, but she had no other choice. Kakashi would undoubtedly check all their affinities the next time they met. She couldn't risk the Jonin finding out about his bloodline. The man had far too many issues with divided loyalties in her opinion. She sighed to herself and mentally reviewed all the different jutsu she knew for wind release. Naruto would need to be a master of wind so that he wouldn't be put in a corner and forced to use his other elements, and that would all mean a ton of training. She hoped the blonde was ready for it. Kakashi Haddock stood with 24 other Jonin instructors. Each of them had their own genin team, which needed to be judged. And today would be the deciding day for many teams. Each instructor had their own test, sometimes passed down from generation to generation, to prove that their students have what it takes to become ninja. It started out as it usually did. Hiruzen Sarutobi stood in front of them with a clipboard and a frown. Squad 1. The older man to the back of the room stepped forward. Squad 1 fails. None of them have the chakra control or reserves to become genin at this time. One of them never will. Sarutobi nodded. Next. Squad 2. The wiry man who looked to be in his early 50s spoke up. Failed. They don't understand the concept of teamwork and have no interest in hearing about it either. Sarutobi checked another team off the list and it went much the same way until they reached Team 5. Then he started in on the other teams, heading backwards towards 0. Kakashi knew it was because the list organized by name not by team. Squad 10. As soon as Sarutobi stepped up to speak, Squad 10 passes by the skin of their teeth. He puffed on his cigarette. They all have skill in basic techniques and understand teamwork. And they have their clan techniques to fall back on. The third Hokage smiled for the first time, marking that team is passed on his board. Good to hear it. He turned to Kakashi, who was standing in front. How about Squad 7? Kakashi received raised eyebrows from the other Jonin when he didn't immediately proclaim them failures. As it was, he'd never passed a team before, not even once. He sighed loudly. Actually, I have a bit of a problem on that end. I'm undecided as to whether to pass them or not. He scratched the back of his head in a self-deprecating way as whispers broke out among the other Jonin. Asuma looked shocked. Damn Kakashi, they must really be something. You've never passed a team in your life. Kurenai nodded. Yes, it's very odd. They turned to look at Sarutobi as he asked, tell me. What special circumstances have arisen to give you doubt? There was a hush around the room as Kakashi shrugged. You know that my squad consists of Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki, and Sakura Haruno. Yes, I am very aware. Kakashi decided to get this out of the way. Sakura has almost no talent for being a kunoichi. She is dense as stone, slow, unskilled, and doesn't understand the basics of teamwork. And the entire time she could do nothing but fawn over the Uchiha to the point where she was utterly useless. Beside him Asuma grunted. I'd have the same problem with Ino if the boy was on my team. But why are you still considering letting them pass? We operate in squads of 4. That has always been the case. He looked to Asuma. Naruto and Sasuke demonstrated a level of teamwork and skill at moderate Chunin level or higher. There were gasps around the room. Kurenai demanded, you've got to be kidding me. Chunin level. Kakashi merely nodded. Sasuke and Naruto teamed up from the very start in a very clever ploy used to entrap me not just to get their goal, but to kill me. They aren't as soft as I thought they would be. In addition to their teamwork, Sasuke showed that he had a strong fire affinity and used the grand fireball technique. Asuma's jaw dropped and his cigarette fell out. He used a high Chunin level jutsu and he isn't even officially a genin yet, and it was an elemental release too. He must be a prodigy like Itachi was. Sarutobi asked quietly, and Naruto? Kakashi couldn't help but smile, though he knew it would go unseen. He surprised me even more. He managed to sneak up on me without me noticing him at all. Which I would never have imagined was possible. Then he coordinated with Sasuke almost perfectly and to top it all off used a wind-style jutsu equal to Sasuke's. He shifted nervously knowing his reputation could go either way. Either he was losing his touch or his students were just that good. I wouldn't normally admit to such a thing, but they had a 1 in 3 chance of killing me with their trick. Asuma, who was bending down to retrieve his dropped cigarette, paused and straightened up. You're joking. They timed the grand fireball to be released a split second before Naruto hit the back of the jutsu with the wind hammer jutsu. It created a bastardized version of the Scorch release, Greater Scorch Blast. It nearly got me too. I was 30 feet in the air with no way to get out of the way. Had to use my second strongest fire jutsu to overpower theirs. A second later Sarutobi asked dumbly, are you saying that 2 students fresh out of the academy used a high Chunin level collaboration in jutsu? And even though under normal circumstances they shouldn't have even been taught about combination jutsu, the 2 of them still managed to pull it off as you say almost perfectly. Kakashi nodded. Sarutobi considered this for only a brief moment. He quickly realized that he couldn't deny them this. The clan heads and the civilian council would throw a fit if Sasuke wasn't given a pass. And it would be an insult to Minato and Kushina not to put Naruto through just because of a talentless girl. And besides it sounded like they were already a perfect match. He raised his head to the Hall of Jonin. Naruto and Sasuke pass. Put the Haruno girl back into academy. I will find a replacement member for the team. In the meantime I want you to train them exclusively. No missions for a month. I want you to make sure you know the extent of their abilities and skills. By that time I should have found someone to replace your fourth member who will complement their skills." Under his mask, Kakashi smiled again. That was just perfect. And he would be free to read Icha with the brat of a fangirl gone. Things were looking up. Kurama cracked one eye open as she felt her tampering was complete for now. She knew that she would have to constantly adjust things for the next 7 to 10 years. After all, chakra networks weren't meant to be reorganized quite so easily. Naruto's powerful connection to the Uzumaki clan traits would help immensely, but it would still be a strain on his young body. She hoped that her skillful manipulations had the desired effect. A while later Naruto woke. Sometime during the intervening time he must have slipped down the side of the tree to curl up into a ball. His own eyes cracked open, crimson in the dappled light. His henge was deactivated at the moment, revealing his true features to the dark forest. Naruto rubbed at his eyes and scratched his ears. Then he sat up yawning. Around him the forest was just beginning to lose itself to the embrace of night again. He wondered how long he'd been out of it. How long was I asleep? I wonder. It must have been a while. I feel pretty cramped. He glanced around, attuning his keen senses to the area around him. It was getting a little easier to deal with the heightened noise, but certain things still bothered him. Naruto leaned back against the tree, wondering why he was so sleepy all the time these days. It wasn't like him. Oh, sure he liked to sleep, but he'd never been someone who would rather sleep than train or prank someone. Why had that changed? The voice of Kurama came in answer. It's because of me. Unfortunately for you, schedule. Your body will need more rest than it usually does. Don't worry. You can rest your mind for as long as you need with me. However, your body will need some time to adjust. The enhancements I made require copious amounts of time to fine-tune. What does copious mean? A sigh and a shifting from Kurama. It's simply another way of saying a lot. He levered himself up and stretched, making sure he was limber. How long was I asleep? My knowledge, a day and a night passed in your world. I slept a whole 24 hours. A little more than that actually. Naruto whistled. That was the longest he'd ever slept. Including the time he forced himself to stay up for almost 2 weeks straight just to prove he could do it. He yawned loudly, filling the clearing with the sound of it. Then he quickly hid his features again and collected the few items he'd left there that last time he trained. After that he left the clearing and forged his way quickly through the forest. A short while later he registered the fact that he was starving. Must have ramen. His course thus changed, Naruto headed for Ichiraku. When he dropped down onto the street that bordered his favorite place to eat, and for certain reasons he tried not to think of only place to eat, there were already 2 people there. Naruto stepped forward and pulled aside the cloth drape, only to see none other than Kakashi and Sasuke. He blinked in surprise. I've never seen those 2 eat here before. Then again, it doesn't look like Kakashi is eating anything. Kakashi glanced back cheerily. Hey Naruto. I decided to take Sasuke out to dinner since I figured you would show up eventually. Naruto nodded wearily, unsure when his routines had become so well known. He hoped that he wasn't being observed. The number of times he'd spoken out loud to himself when talking with Kurama were numerous. He didn't like the thought of someone listening in or worse, recognizing just who she was. After a second of being unnerved he finally sat down and ordered the usual 6 bowls of their best miso ramen. Meanwhile he watched Kakashi with a calculating eye, though it probably came off as pissy teenager instead of suspicious. Sasuke glanced sideways at him, his own look less than inviting. Something wrong, dope? Naruto showed his teeth. Nothing's wrong, team. They sat for another 3 minutes while Sasuke and Naruto waited for his food. It was then that Kakashi broke the uneasy silence. Well. I have good news, I have bad news, and I have news that could be taken either way. Silence. Which do you 2 want to hear first? They thought about it for a moment and then replied at the exact same time. Bad news. It gave them a sort of twins vibe that would have been really hot if they were identical twin sisters. However, under these circumstances, it just creeped the jonin out. He sweat dropped and looked between the 2 of them, deciding to get it over with. The bad news is that even though you both passed, we won't be taking any missions for an entire month. Naruto and Sasuke had startlingly similar reactions. They both paused, then blinked. Naruto asked, what? Why don't we get any missions? Sasuke growled. I knew it was too good to be true. Uchiha turned to Naruto. That means they didn't pass Sakura, so we're stuck until they find a 4th squad member. He looked back to Kakashi. Isn't that right? Kakashi nodded. They were very surprised at how successful you were. In fact, several of my coworkers commented that they wished their squad was as naturally gifted. But at the same time the rest of them thought I was lying to make myself look better. Sasuke muttered under his breath, eyeing the jonin with slight disdain. Why would it make you look better? You're the one who almost got incinerated. Naruto chuckled at that. Yeah, you should have seen your face, sensei. If it wasn't for your reflexes you'd be Ash right now. The older man didn't speak for a few moments while he considered the rather unnerving truth of that statement. It's almost unreal to me. That's the closest I've come to actually dying in quite a while, and it was my own genin test. I should be wary of giving them the opportunity to kill me from now on. It won't make me look very good if I'm mortally wounded by genin, regardless of how talented they may be. He coughed. Well, it makes me look better because having such high-value students will give me more prestige. Basically your success will rub off onto my record. Kakashi gestured to them. If you two become well-known shinobi, then it will be a boon to my career since I was the one who trained you. Just look at the Hokage. His genin team went on to become the 3 legendary Sannin. Naruto's eyes widened. Really, he thought back to the history lessons in the academy. Wait, aren't 2 of them like Rogenins or something now? Sasuke glanced at Naruto. You're right, Naruto. I remember one of our lessons at academy. The one called Orochimaru, was it? Wasn't he exiled from the village for illegal experimentation? Actually he was, but let's not talk about him. It's an unpleasant topic. As I was saying earlier before I was interrupted, you won't be taking missions for at least a month. In that time I will be training both of you without having to bother with constant interruption. Since it's blatantly obvious that you have the skill, I'll be showing you both the ropes on elemental chakra. Sasuke smirked. I take it while we are doing that you will be looking for a suitable genin to fill in for Sakura. That's exactly what's going on. Kakashi grinned. I'm fairly sure whoever is picked will be able to keep up with you. I doubt the Hokage would force a less talented individual on our team after what happened to Sakura. Naruto nodded absently as AM placed a steaming bowl of ramen in front of him. He suddenly found the conversation much less interesting. He grinned and snapped a pair of chopsticks apart before beginning to inhale his ramen at a frantic pace. Sasuke, surprised by the sudden burst of chakra, scooted away from him, wary of the blonde's pistoning elbows. AM giggled at him. Quite the sight, isn't it? Almost seems like he has some sort of ramen absorption seal on him. Seeing how he can eat a solid 15 bowls without being full. Uchiha's eyes bulged slightly and Kakashi commented dryly. It's no wonder he never runs out of energy. That's enough calories for a week. Sasuke demanded, is he trying to kill himself? Naruto halted for a second, turning his head to Sasuke. I'll have you know this is nothing. My record is 26 bowls. With that he returned to devouring his meal. In the back of the shop, AM's father just chuckled. A few more years and he could retire, maybe hire someone to run the shop for him. Yeah, he could live of the fat of the land, or at least the inside of Naruto's wallet and that of his friends. Hell. If the blonde knucklehead lived long enough, he might even open up a few other branches. He could see it now. The International Ichiraku Ramen Company. For the better part of a half an hour, conversation was pointless. Naruto couldn't be bothered to include himself in anything so trivial as speech, while there was still ramen to be consumed. So for that period of time Sasuke brooded and Kakashi made small talk with AM. The young Uchiha watched Naruto carefully. There was something off about the blonde. And it was more than the fact that they had accomplished a nearly impossible task with only minor foreplanning. It was something fundamental which he was only just noticing. When Naruto had first come to his attention, it had been back at academy. He was the only person he knew who felt the same pain as him, even if he couldn't say for sure what the reason was. Over time he'd formed the opinion that Naruto was a loser who sought attention as a means of covering up his insecurities and loneliness. But that observation was no longer valid. Naruto was a rough one to be sure, but he couldn't call Naruto dead last. As far as he was concerned, Naruto was in second place right behind him. And that was another thing. Going from bottom of the class to being a worthy rival to the head student required more than a little determination. Sasuke wondered if they would be close enough one day for Naruto to help him kill Itachi. Naruto of all people could understand his feelings. The hate for his brother was probably very similar to Naruto's hate for the village. Sasuke smiled inwardly. Naruto would become strong, and so would he. Naruto finished his unholy consumption of ramen and pushed the stack of bowls aside with a contented grin. Kakashi was looking at said stack with a blatantly horrified expression. I know he said he could eat 15 bowls and keep going, but he actually ate 20 full-size bowls of ramen. He's worse than his parents. The pile of dishes recalled a memory of Minato and Kushina sharing a bowl of ramen here once. It was like two wolves fighting over the last scrap of meat on a carcass. Neither of them would give ground to the other, and holy hell, the tab they could rack up. Minato once used swift release just to prove a point, polishing off a solid 7 bowls before Kushina could finish one. And that wasn't counting when Kushina was pregnant. It was as if she was eating for 3. Her, the baby, and the Kyuubi along with it. Kakashi was quite glad that they hadn't had 2 children. He would be broke in half a year and Ichiraku would own the world. He shook his head, dispelling the images of his childhood. Back when he was young and innocent. Before he knew the horror of Namikaze and Uzumaki eating habits. Sasuke and Naruto took notice of Kakashi's suddenly pale complexion. Then it seemed as if something dawned on the Uchiha, quickly followed by Naruto, who glanced between the stack of bowls, and Kakashi. Then in a burst of speed Naruto grabbed Sasuke by the back of the collar and bolted, shouting, "Come on, I got a great jutsu to show you." Kakashi stood to pursue them but halted as something took hold of his collar. "Excuse me, Kakashi-kun. There seems to be a misunderstanding here. Perhaps you would like to clear it up for me." Her honeyed sweet voice dredged up images of Inoichi and Shikaku after arguments at home, their battered faces and bruised bodies. "Curse you, Naruto. Why don't we discuss your problem, Kakashi-kun? I'm sure we can work on a payment plan for you if you need it." Sasuke gritted his teeth as his blonde teammate at last let go of the back of his collar. Damn, he sure knows how to make tracks when his money is at stake. Almost makes me feel bad for Kakashi, almost. Sasuke patted himself down, getting rid of the dirt that clung to him. He looked around, trying to figure out where Naruto had dragged him off to. They were standing in a clearing surrounded by massive trees. It was deeply shadowed with only a few bars of light shining through to the ground, seeming like solid spears of gold. He twisted around. Naruto was walking to the other side of the clearing, pulling out kunai. He quickly made a mark on the tree and turned back. "So Sasuke, what do you think of my training area? Pretty cool, huh?" Sasuke had no clue where he was except that they were somewhere on the outskirts of the village. The forest around them was dark and he could hear things growling and roaring in the distance. He shook his head. "Where is this dope? I've never been here." "Well duh. This is my training ground. Never even seen anyone here. This here is training ground 44, the Forest of Death. Personally I don't really see what is so scary about the place, but oh well. At least no one comes and bothers me while I'm training. And the best part is that it's huge, so I can even get away from the villagers here." Sasuke gave Naruto an odd look. "What is that supposed to mean?" Naruto scratched the back of his head uneasily. "Forget I said anything. Anyway, this is where I train. Just head in any direction for long enough and you'll come to the outer edge of the forest. It's only a couple miles wide with a big fence surrounding it." Naruto frowned. "But make sure you keep clear of this place when the Chunin exams and Jonin exams start. They both use this place for their tests." "Why? It doesn't seem very dangerous to me." The blonde grinned. "Yeah, because I'm here. Everything here avoids me like the plague. Don't ask me why, but I don't think that the huge spiders, giant snakes, dire bears, and everything else would object to eating you." Naruto gestured around him. "Then there's the man eating plants and the fact that anything you try to eat is probably poisonous. I got really ill trying to hunt here not long ago." Sasuke asked, "So you're the only person who uses this training ground?" "Well, not only, but I've only ever heard of one other person coming. The crazy snake lady Anko." "Crazy snake lady?" Naruto nodded sagely. "She's like the scariest jonin in the village. She used to be assigned to catch me when I pulled a really big prank, but she only caught me once. I heard that she's not welcome training with the other ninja, so she comes here, or at least that's what they say. I've never seen her here." Stretching, Naruto put his hands over his head. "I already trained before I talked with Kakashi-sensei and you, but I needed to get the hell out of there before he made me pick up part of the tab. I figured I might as well show you my training spot while I was at it." There was a pause while Sasuke thought it over. "Why not train at my clan compound?" Naruto cringed. It's not that I wouldn't like to, Sasuke, it's just that if anyone saw me training with you, there would be a huge mess." "Why?" Sasuke wasn't understanding what the deal was. It seemed every other sentence Naruto revealed some kind of secret that he wasn't supposed to talk about. He was constantly smoothing over his own words and pretending like it didn't matter. And what did he mean by a mess? Was he suggesting that they would get in trouble for training together? They were on the same team. Naruto looked away. "I'm sure you know why, Sasuke. You're smart. You see how everyone treats me, but you're the precious Uchiha. At best they'd think I was dragging you down. At worst they'd try to get me kicked off the team. That's ridiculous. No one is that stupid. Right? Even if there is something wrong with Naruto, the village wouldn't sabotage his ninja career just because they saw him training with me." A scowl crossed Naruto's face. "You saw how Sakura treats me. The whole village has been like that since I was kicked out of the orphanage." Sasuke blinked. Kicked out?" "Yeah. I was kicked out of the orphanage at 5. In case you didn't know, the Hokage gives me an allowance of sorts so I can survive. It would be enough, but everyone charges me 3 times normal if they sell to me at all. I couldn't even get an apartment for a year when I was thrown out. No one would let me rent anything. Spent half the year in the hospital after getting beat by drunks." Naruto saw the look on Sasuke's face. "You probably think I should hate the village, huh?" Uchiha's eyes flashed. "Of course, why the hell haven't you left already?" He shrugged. "Where would I go? This is the only place I know. At least the old man tries to take care of me. Once I start getting stronger I can go on missions and make a name for myself. The village can't hate me forever. Eventually they'll start respecting me for my power if nothing else." That's why I want to become Hokage. Naruto smirked. At least most of the shinobi don't hate me. I know most of the ninja don't like you. They think you're a stuck-up arrogant emo asshole. So if you think about it, we're both trying to get strong, just for different reasons. I want to be Hokage. You want to kill a certain someone. Sasuke's lips twitched. You know Naruto, when you're not acting like an idiot you have a way with words. I know, right? Now I'm getting depressed. Let's have a little spar so I can forget about the stupid village. Sasuke nodded and dropped into a fighting stance. Naruto recognized it and dropped into his own. After a second they charged at each other. Sunagakure, walking along the halls of the Kazakiyage's tower in the village hidden in the sand, Baki knew he was in trouble. Big trouble. However, this was something he thought he would have to get used to over the next few years if he lived that long. He closed his eyes briefly in resignation as he knocked at the entrance to the Kazakiyage's office. A few moments passed and he started to sweat. His liege didn't usually put him on the spot like this, and the 4 envoys from the hidden sound behind him were casting suspicious looks in his direction. There were 3 that he couldn't care less about. It was the 4th who gave him pause. A man with silver white hair and sharp eyes, hidden behind round glasses. He was young, but moved with more experience and ease than many jonin. Baki was instantly wary of him. No one in his position lived very long unless they were cautious. And the ninja from Odo set off every alarm in his head repeatedly. The voice from within took his attention away from the hidden sound shinobi. He quickly turned the handle and opened the doors to the inner office. Inside was a Spartan room, circular in its design and centered around a large desk. Sitting at said desk was a man, not quite of average height, his dark red hair almost too dark to be labeled as such. His pale skin had only been slightly tanned by the harsh desert sun, and his eyes were as sharp as ever. This was the Kazakiyage. A man who lived his life in such a way as to make all fear and respect him. Although these days it was usually the former much more than the later. The Kazakiyage glanced upwards, his gaze moving over his right-hand man and the 4 guests. He straightened and asked, "So you are the ones he sent? I don't see how this is supposed to help out plans in any way. Does your leader take me for a fool?" The words were spoken calmly, but malice was laid thick upon them, showing that he was less than pleased. Orochimaru wanted to go to war, and he wanted the aid of Suna in that self-same war. Had this been against Iwa he would have applauded the idea. Perhaps even gone about the preparations with some eagerness. But that was most certainly not the case. The leader of the newly formed Sound Village wanted to move on Konoha, Suna's old allies. And while there was little love between the 2 great nations of late, it was still an ill-advised idea. It would put a great strain on his resources. After all, with where they all lived, resources were a hard enough commodity to come by regardless. So he could reasonably be angry when the former Konohanin sent only 6 of his ninja. 2 were already staying in the village, supposedly waiting for a 3rd member to arrive. And now a 2nd team of genin. What was that man playing at? War required strong shinobi. And thus far all he'd seen were part of a distraction and nothing more. If Orochimaru thought that Suna would bear the great load of the war while Odo went on unscathed, he was wrong. Standing off to one side now, Baki saw the rapid-fire flash of emotions cross his cage's face. None of them pleasant. Eventually the group's leader deemed it appropriate to speak. Evidently where he came from, you made sure that the boss was absolutely finished before saying anything. It was the silver-haired young man who answered. "I assure you, Kazakiyage-sama, Lord Orochimaru is not taking any chances. We are more than a distraction. I personally have the next batch of plans from him. I would ask that you read them over before dismissing my lord's plans out of hand." Baki glanced between them as the Kazakiyage's eyes narrowed. The expression reminded him of nothing so much as a giant angry sand scorpion. "Who are you, boy? And more importantly, are you under the impression that I am blind? I have been reading you master's plans for the last 2 months as he sends them to me piecemeal. Allow me to say this. I will not continue to be fed information one bite at a time." The Kazakiyage's lips twitched in a manner that Baki knew well. It signaled when the man had reached the end of his patience. Then again, realistically he never had much to begin with. He said, almost apologetically, "All plans for war with Konoha will be put on hold until your lord sees fit to supply me with the information I desire. If you cannot show me concrete proof that Odo is ready to go into a serious war, then I will be visiting Konoha with a viable means to re-solidify our fractured alliance. That would be most unwise, Kazakiyage-sama. Lord Orochimaru would not take such a betrayal lightly and quite." Baki watched as the Kazakage stood, his anger radiating out in a wave. "You have no authority here, boy. And I have absolutely no reason to trust or support Orochimaru in this matter. You are not the lesser of 2 evils. This alliance with Odo is fragile to say the least. Remember the fact that your village hasn't even existed for 10 years. Not even 5. When you have 80 years of experience and know how things work, you can return and tell me what is wise." He narrowed his eyes. "I have not forgotten that Orochimaru betrayed his own village in a vain quest for immortality. At this point that Tsuchikage has more credibility than you, and I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw the Great Wall. The Budo visibly withered under the basilisk gaze of Suna's leader. I apologize for any insult I may have done to you as an Apollo. You may leave. I have nothing more to say to you until my demands have been met. If I have received no answer from you master in the next month, Konoha will learn of your plans, and I will wage war on Odo instead. Aki nodded ever so slightly. He would have agreed with that plan to begin with. After all, they were bargaining from the position of strength. Odo was practically a Rouge village at this point, so there really wasn't anything they could say against the Kazekage or Suna for rejecting him or giving such a harsh ultimatum. The Budo bowed once and nodded to his men. They quickly left the office. Once they were gone, Baki turned to his lord. It has seemed that they fully intend on leading us around on a leash. What are your orders, Kazekage-sama? His master frowned. In the past 2 months, what little faith I had in them has evaporated as a drop of water upon this tower's roof. Send 2 teams of Jonin to the location of the Odo agent station here. Kill one. Bring the other in for questioning. He paused as if considering it. Have the one known as Kabuto killed, but teach him a lesson first. Take the other 3 hostage. I don't think that they will have any use as such, but we can send them to Konoha. May I ask why? Indeed. I have wanted to bring Suna and Konoha back together for some time now. Ever since the incident 6 years ago with Iwa, I have been feeling pressured by our northern neighbor. The Leaf Village houses the Yamanaka clan, who are more than skilled enough to extract crucial information from the 4 captured Odo nin. They would serve as a goodwill gesture. Aki furrowed his own brow. Are you thinking that it would be wise to ally with Konoha before Iwa attempts anything on us? They are nearly recovered from their last war and could make an attempt on our village while it's weakened. The Kazekage stippled his fingers. That is exactly what I am thinking. Inoki will not rest idle for long. And I heard a rumor that I would like to find proof of in Konoha. Hopefully our new alliance will prove to be more lasting than the last. Aki blinked but didn't ask about the rumor. He had business to attend to after all. Somewhere outside of Kiri, the blast of fire tore its way through the wall of the stone cavern, eating up all the oxygen in the small corridor. A second later, Mei Terumi dashed out weaving hand seal single-handed. Her other was busy launching shuriken at a lone girl. Her opponent was proving to be extremely hard to put down, having what Mei considered to be the largest collection of evasive techniques she'd ever encountered. So far, the bespectacled Redeed had managed to escape no less than 12 potentially fatal jutsu, 3 traps, and 4 taijutsu exchanges. Mei had to give it to her, she had unbelievable stamina. Lava release. Cauterizing rain. She exhaled and sent dozens of marble-sized globs of lava towards her. The Redeed eyes went wide as she flung herself to the side, her own hands running through an earth jutsu that Mei recognized. Damn. She's getting away again. Her opponent sank into the wall beside her and into the next room. Mei hissed in irritation and lashed out at the wall, smashing through the stone, which had already been weakened by a previous exchange. Dust flew in her eyes, blinding her for a moment as she caught her balance on the other side of the wall. Instinctively she deflected several kunai that were tossed her way. Shit. Mei leapt back out of the hole, crossing both arms over her face as the explosive kunai detonated. She landed and was immediately accosted by her right-hand man Ao. Lady Termei. Would you like me to apprehend her? Mei frowned. Do you think I cannot do it? I will deal with the girl. She is obviously in Uzumaki. We will take her alive. Yes, my lady. Ao disappeared back into the chaos of the underground complex. Mayuri entered the room, quickly bringing her hands together in a wind jutsu. The dust was whipped away, revealing the girl trying to complete her own chain of hand seals. Mei dashed forward. She wasn't willing to take a chance on it being something unknown to her. She didn't recognize the sequence, so she couldn't allow her to complete the jutsu. Karen was a split second from releasing a powerful electrical shock into the woman in front of her when she felt a kunai bit deeply in her shoulder. She cringed and finished her jutsu. Lightning Dragon Jutsu. Mei dropped flat to the ground as the massive influx of lightning chakra blasted right over to her head, annihilating the rest of the room and blasting the hallway to rubble. Then she was up again and holding the Redeed's hands with one of hers. You're done, girl. THWACK. Mei hefted her fellow Redeed over her shoulder and exited the room. She needed to make sure the rest of her men were doing their jobs. Not many of Orochimaru's henchmen were left alive here, but there were many supplies that had been left behind. The rebellion was going to take advantage of that without a doubt. It's fortunate that we found this place, though we can only afford to stay here so long. I don't fancy fighting with one of the 3 Sannin on his home turf. We must be gone before he returns. Maybe I can get his plans from this girl. She seems like she was the leader of this particular branch. Only time would tell. They had a rebellion to win after all. Anko Mitarashi reflected that there were many interesting things in this world that she would never see, however there was one sight she was privileged to see. What was it? Well, she'd been heading though the forest of death to her usual training spot, but due to a rather annoying incident, she'd made a detour to come through the west side of the forest. And she'd stumbled upon a little clearing not unlike her own. It was a bit larger and it was empty. Except that it had plenty of stuff in it. Off to one side of the hard-packed dirt were a few makeshift training dummies and targets which had been nailed up the sides of the huge trees. By one tree there were two well-worn packs and a low table. On the table were two metal lunch boxes. Anko had been frowning dangerously by that time. How dare someone come into her territory and train? This was her area where she sharpened her skills. She wouldn't let some idiot come in and set up camp without giving him a piece of her mind as painfully as possible. But then the unexpected happened. She heard an explosion on the other side of the area. Her gaze was drawn to a boy, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, spinning backwards through the air to land in the middle of the clearing. Right after him came another with black hair and dark eyes. She immediately knew who they were. Naruto Uzumaki and Sasuke Uchiha. Any thoughts of revenge flew out the window as she realized that two genin were training in the forest of death. And not just any genin, but two unsupervised genin who hadn't gone on a single mission yet. She smirked at the audacity of it. There were some chunin who were afraid of this place, but those two were here training. That wasn't the end of it either. The fact that the brooding emo king of Konoha Academy with the best scores since his older brother many years before was fighting Naruto Uzumaki, the self-proclaimed prankster king and future Hokage, with historically low academy scores was astounding. Not to mention exceedingly unexpected. She grinned and settled down to watch, wondering just how good the two of them were. After all, she'd heard Kakashi talking about them. It would be interesting to see if they were all they were chalked up to be. Sasuke dashed forward, twisting at the last moment to avoid Naruto's snap kick. He'd learned to avoid taking hits from the blonde. His blows were just a bit too powerful to be shrugged off. Naruto lunged forward and leapt in the air, turning a half spin and bringing his foot around in a roundhouse. Sasuke ducked and rolled to avoid the line of shuriken Naruto threw in front of him. Naruto landed and tried to grab his arm. He barely deflected it in time and was forced backwards again. A second attempt to ensnare his arm was successful and Naruto pulled him into the way of his raised knee. Sasuke grimaced and turned his body to the side, punching Naruto in the side of the head with his free hand. Naruto didn't even seem fazed by the hit and sent a fist into the crook of Sasuke's elbow, drawing a grunt of pain from the Uchiha. They separated for a moment but Naruto didn't give him a chance to rest. He clapped his hands together sending a blast of wind at him. Shit. Sasuke leaned backwards, narrowly dodging the compressed wind attack. It was only a D-rank jutsu without hand signs, but Naruto could do it in a split second and it would still knock him sprawling with a direct hit. And he couldn't use any ninjutsu on command like Naruto to counter. Sasuke regained his balance a second before Naruto was on him again, his strikes coming in at all angles. Beating him back, Naruto took the chance to hook his leg with his foot, sending Sasuke to his back. Sasuke kicked Naruto's legs out from under him as he went down. Both of them were up again, but this time Sasuke managed to keep on the offensive for almost 5 minutes. Naruto struggled to keep up with the Uchiha's crippling strikes, aimed for his chest and arms for the most part. He took several hits before he got the upper hand, cracking his palm into Sasuke's throat. The Uchiha stumbled back, holding his hand to his windpipe and struggling to breath. Naruto took the opportunity to get out of range and gather his chakra for a ninjutsu. He wove 7 hand signs and inhaled. Wind release. Wind spear jutsu. The air in front of Naruto rippled as the low-powered wind spear sheared through the space between them. He could do it full power, but it would certainly kill Sasuke if he did that. The jutsu impacted Sasuke's chest and sent him hurtling back, his fall broken by one of the trees. Sasuke slumped down the tree uninjured but completely exhausted. Naruto abandoned his combat stance and ran over to his downed opponent. Sasuke looked up, wiping a dribble of blood from the side of his mouth. Nice move, dope. I keep forgetting how much chakra you have. Sorry Sasuke, but you can't beat me with ninjutsu. Anyway, you're drooling blood. Did I damage anything inside with that last attack? Chuckling, Sasuke shook his head. Nah, but almost bit a hole in my cheek just now. Your luck when it comes to catching me at bad times is ridiculous. Not my fault. I've always been lucky. Naruto paused for a moment. It was true that he had impossibly uncanny luck when it came to almost everything. He just figured it was karma paying him back for how shitty his life had been so far. So, what did it matter? But now that he thought about it from Sasuke's perspective, it probably felt a bit unfair. So far out of a dozen fights, he'd managed to luck out at least 20 times, and his Uchiha teammate was beginning to get exasperated. He wondered how his luck would hold up against a more formidable opponent. If he could take down Sasuke on luck alone, how about a Chunin or even hurt a Jonin he didn't know, and luck wasn't a skill he could train, at least he didn't think it was. Naruto shrugged mentally at his own ramblings and offered Sasuke a hand. The Uchiha grunted and accepted help getting up. His pride was one thing that he left at home in these fights. To put it simply, when he was prideful, Naruto tended to have almost unnerving streaks of pseudo-miracles. For instance, the time he challenged a blonde to a kunai throwing exercise. He'd wanted to prove to Naruto just who was best. He'd thrown his kunai and managed a near bullseye. Naruto threw his missed the target center completely, ricocheted off the tree and hit a bullseye on the target across the clearing. The blonde required several minutes to come down from his awesomeness-induced high. And then there was when he'd laughed at Naruto's pathetic chakra control. Which in comparison to his own, really was terrible. Naruto had shouted at the top of his lungs that he would prove him wrong. Sasuke challenged him to use the tree climbing exercise. Somehow Naruto had done it on his first try and damn near perfectly. Since then Sasuke had felt like Naruto was one of those people who it was best not to limit. The more ceilings you put between Naruto and the sky, the faster he broke through them. He just tried to keep up. It was an odd experience for him, knowing that someone was ahead of you and that you probably would never reach their level. His brother Itachi was his goal. But that was a life goal, something he would strive for throughout his career as a ninja. It disturbed him that he didn't think he'd never be able to surpass Naruto. "I think I'm done for the day, Naruto. I'll see you around." Sasuke headed to the small table to collect his pack before leaving the clearing. Naruto called out, "Try not to get eaten on the way home." Sasuke didn't answer as he left the clearing, leaving Naruto alone, or relatively so. Naruto waited a few moments till he was sure that Sasuke was gone. Then he let out a long sigh. He thought that he might be on the verge of befriending him, but there was still something off about Sasuke, as though he was hesitant to form any kind of bond with anyone. Student or teacher. But then again, maybe 3 days was too short a time for any kind of friendship to form. He'd give it time. Since they were on the same team, they'd have plenty of it. Naruto sighed in relief as he let the hinge hiding his features drop. With a mild groan of pleasure as his fox ears returned. When they were hinged, it felt like someone had taped them to the side of his head. Extremely uncomfortable. But now that they were free, he had some measure of relief. Along with his improved hearing came a very slight increase in his sense of smell, something Kurama had worked out for him the day before. But as she said, don't get cocky. There are plenty of ninja who can mask their smell. And it's the ones you don't sense that kills you. Overall, he felt much better than even when he'd started sparring with Sasuke. Naruto dropped down at the small table at the base of the tree. A second later, he had a brush and ink in front of him, along with a small blank scroll. Naruto's smile became a frown of concentration as he dipped the brush and put it to the blank parchment, brushing out the signature symbols that were the basis for all Fuinjutsu. Fuinjutsu, as Kurama pointed out, was the most diverse of all the ninja arts. And by a very wide margin. To hear her tell it, if every different seal was a jutsu, then there were more Fuinjutsu than ninjutsu, jinjutsu, and taijutsu combined. That was amazing. Naruto honestly had been stuck for words. That something could cover such a massive amount of material and still be considered a single branch of jutsu was somewhat scary. Kurama sympathized with him. After all, sealing was the cause of their current predicament. If it wasn't for Fuinjutsu, then there would be no way to keep the Biju contained. And if that was the case, then his mother would never have been sent to the Leaf Village to become the next Jinchuriki, and he would never have been born. So in a roundabout way, he felt as though he owed his life to Fuinjutsu, and he was determined to master it. However, there was a serious problem that needed to be worked out first. His handwriting was unrecognizable. Even back at academy, his terrible penmanship had been somewhat of a legend. How Ruka was able to decipher what minds as well have been archaic ruins was anyone's guess. Naruto's was that Iruka possessed calligraphy skills only marginally higher than himself, which explained why Kiba was always getting in trouble for lying about his grades. He didn't realize that when Iruka wrote an F, it sometimes looked like a really sloppy A. But that was beside the point. He needed to be able to write neatly before he ever attempted the most basic Fuinjutsu. Kurama mentioned the possible removal of fingers, hands, arms, etc. Such threats were not idle and kept him on track. He worked for a short while on his handwriting before abandoning it. After all, it would be a long time before he had the chakra control and the calligraphy skills to do even rudimentary seals. For now, Kurama wanted him to focus most of his attention on his ninjutsu training. He was just fine with that. Putting away his tools, Naruto stood and returned to the center of the training area. He stretched and popped his neck before bringing his hands together in his favorite jutsu. The clearing exploded with white smoke, which took a few moments to dissipate. When it did, there were 50 clones standing ready for action. Naruto shouted, "All right. 2 groups of 25. First group works on wind release, and second group works on the lightning chakra control exercise." The clones swiftly divided, one moving out into the forest surrounding them while the other stayed in place, sitting cross-legged on the ground. It wasn't more than a minute before the sound of utter chaos was heard off in the forest, his clones practicing every wind jutsu he knew. Naruto glanced around the clearing as an uneasy feeling crawled up his spine. He frowned again and lifted his head to scent the air. Nothing. But his keen ears registered an ever so slight squeak like sandal rubber on tree bark. He whipped around and made several hand seals. Wind release. Concussive blast. The air in front of him hiccuped as he flung his fist in the general area of the sound he heard. The space in between him and his target compressed with a massive surge of chakra, blasting forward into one of the trees that bordered the clearing. An ear-splitting crack sounded as his attack ripped into the huge tree. At the same time it tore a smaller branch off, sending it back into the dark forest and out of sight. He didn't see anything move and he still couldn't smell anything, but he heard it again. A high-pitched squeak. He realized now that someone had watched him, his ears, his claws, his eyes. This was not good. Oh shit. Someone saw. And they didn't just run in the opposite direction. Does that mean they aren't afraid of me or something? Naruto growled in the back of his throat. Someone, a shinobi, was here and he or she knew his secret now. He couldn't afford to let them get away without knowing who it was and what they intended. But if it's a jonin, then I'm in deep trouble. I might be able to catch a jonin, seeing how I can escape one, but getting one to talk after seeing me like this could be hard. Naruto racked his brains for a solution and had an epiphany. Hey Anko. I know you're there. Come out already. He shouted his challenge, hoping that she would respond. If she didn't, he was sunk. Anko knew this place as good as he did. He couldn't catch her on her home turf. I'm surprised to figured out it was me, brat. Naruto looked to the side as a young woman dropped out of the trees. She was of average height with dark purple hair done up in a spiky ponytail. He knew this interesting hairstyle had given rise to one of her many nicknames. The purple pineapple. In addition to her unique hair, she also dressed rather differently from most kunoichi. Anko was currently wearing a skin-tight body net under a loose tan trench coat which was open. She was practically flashing everyone just walking around. Besides that, she wore a very short skirt. Naruto couldn't tell what they really were, but they had lots of pockets that seemed to be stuffed with any number of things. Revealing as they were, the fact that they were orange meant she couldn't be all that bad. He finished the visual inspection and met her eyes. Anko's cocky grin and docile, read erotic, stance shifted uneasily. Naruto knew he was in trouble. He'd seen that look before, the disbelieving stare. He scowled, waiting for her expression to shift to anger and hatred. She'd be just like the villagers were. Anko blinked. I'll love the ears and claws, but those are some freaky eyes, kid. Her tone was slightly wary, but to his shock no anger or hate colored her expression or voice. You aren't afraid of me? She tilted her head as a sorrowful look etched itself into her face. Should I, Gaki? Depends. Anko shifted again, their eyes staying locked. On whether I go tell Lord Hokage. He nodded. Do you think you can kill me? Cause if you aren't damn sure about it, I'd suggest that you give up. Naruto frowned and examined her closer. He figured her for a mid to long range fighter. Kunoichi generally didn't like to engage in close combat too often. But she was a jonin. There wasn't much hope to match his natural skill against pure experience. And there's no way of knowing if my huge chakra reserves mean anything. I don't think I really have a chance to win against her. Maybe if I use my hidden abilities and I had the drop on her, but not like this. He relaxed his posture slightly. I can't beat you, not without making things even worse. Naruto's ears drooped a bit. I wish I could stop you from telling Gramps, but it's your job. I can't be angry with you for that. The purple-haired jonin looked even more surprised at this assessment. Well, brat, you're right about fighting me. I'd tear you apart in seconds, but you're wrong about it being my job to report you to the Hokage. Huh? He didn't quite believe what he was hearing. Could you say that again? Anko rolled her eyes. You heard me, Gaki. It's my job to protect the village and obey the Hokage. Make no mistake, twerp. If you ever become a threat to the village, I'll gut you and then hog to you with your own intestines before I drop you in Lord Hokage's office. She held up one finger. But I don't think you are a threat. Crazy red eyes or not. Naruto's crimson orbs burned holes in her as he mulled over her words. So you aren't going to report me, but you aren't going to kill me either. I get it. You're paranoid. Anko sighed and rubbed the back of her neck, trying to seem more relaxed. Listen, I know you probably think that I'm trying to trick you or something, but I'm not. To be perfectly honest, you have a harder time with the village than me. I won't make your life harder when it doesn't have to be. Naruto thought, she can't be serious, is she actually letting me go? Even though it's obvious that I've been changed by the Kyuubi's power, he didn't know there were people in the Leaf Village who were sympathetic to him. Kakashi was alright, but he was his sensei. The old man was nice too, but he'd think that he was tainted by his demonic power. All his life he struggled to find someone who wouldn't judge him. That was true even before he found out why he was hated so profoundly. He asked slowly, why everyone hates me? Only Kakashi-sensei, Jiji, and Sasuke don't treat me like a demon. How come you don't hate me? Because Anko sighed. I'm just like you. I might not have a demon inside me, but most of the village hates me because of something I didn't do and couldn't control. My old sensei went rogue and hurt many of the villagers and shinobi. The village couldn't take their anger out on him, so they turned their anger on me. It's the same as you and the fox. Naruto nodded once, unconsciously scratching behind one ear. You're not worried at all. He didn't believe that at all. Anyone would be scared shitless of a kid who contained the Kyuubi if he started to look like the fox. Not that he regretted having Kurama change him. Whether people were afraid of it or not, his fox form was badass. His claws made for a natural taijutsu weapon. His ears made him much harder to sneak up on as they provided him with better hearing and allowed for swiveling. And his eyes would unnerve even the strongest shinobi once he was older anyway. He hadn't actually been thinking about that when he asked for them. At the time he thought it was amazing that he could make himself look like her. But now he could recognize the combat advantage they bestowed. Anko seemed to sense the turn of his thoughts because she smiled. Gaki, you aren't the sneaky type. Sure, you can give an Anbu a run for his money, but it isn't your nature. If you wanted to get back at the village, really do some damage, you'd have done it already. And as far as I'm concerned, you look pretty cute with the ears and all. There was a few moments of silence as Naruto again thought her words over. Then a bright smile lit his face. Anko-san, could I ask a favor? HN? What kind of favor besides not telling anyone about this? I need someone who can teach me something special. But I don't think it would be a good idea to ask Kakashi-sensei. She blinked. You're not serious, are you? Naruto nodded quickly. Right. Well, I'm kind of the last person you would want to explain this sort of thing to you, but okay. Let's see how much brain damage I can cause. She stepped forward, rubbing her hands together in an evil sort of way. Naruto went pale and waved his hands frantically. No. Not that. Actual training. I think Kakashi would be guaranteed to tell Gigi about my power. Power? She stopped and dropped her hands. What power do you have that needs training that you won't ask Kakashi-senpai about? He sighed and closed his eyes for a second. Kurama was speaking to him, having woken up for the last part of the exchange. Are you sure about this? Yes, she's like the only one in the village who is treated like me. She won't stab me in the back, and she already said that she won't go running to the Hokage. I can't sense any ill intent from her, so fine. Go ahead, but remember to be much more careful next time. If someone less sympathetic finds out, you will be in deep trouble. And you aren't strong enough to get out of it even with my help. Thanks, Kurama. Don't mention it, Kit. Naruto opened his eyes and glanced up at Anko. He took a deep breath before continuing. I have a bloodline that I haven't told anyone about. Anko's eyes widened. Really, that's awesome, Gaki. Hardly anyone in Konoha has bloodlines besides the Uchiha and Hyuga. Wait, are those eyes of yours actually a sign of the bloodline? He shook his head. No. That was the Kyuubi. But my bloodline is really rare, so I didn't want to tell Kakashi. He would tell Gigi and I just know it would get leaked somehow. Then I'd have to worry about being kidnapped or something. Kidnapping, eh? Never thought you were smart enough to grasp village politics so well. So what does this bloodline do? Seeing how I doubt you know the name. Naruto shook his head once more. It is a Keke Toda plasma release. Anko's jaw dropped. Keke Toda. Yeah. She gulped. Holy shit, how the hell do you know you have it? Naruto glanced away from her, muttering, the Kyuubi told me. Anko missed his answer as she stepped forward. Okay, Gaki. Forget I said anything. There is no way I'm letting this get away from me. Plasma release. Really? I've never even heard of that before. But if it's a Keke Toda, you can't go around training on your own. She grinned and planted her hand on top of his head. Tell you what, whenever I'm not on a mission, I'll come by and help you train. She giggled. I can hear it now. Anko Midarashi, the woman who trained Naruto Uzumaki how to use his Keke Toda. Now that would be one hell of a way to make a name for myself. You're as bad as Kakashi-sensei, trying to get my fame to rub off on him. Anko scratched behind his ears as she bent down. You got that right, Gaki. I'm going to get a ton of credit for training a badass shinobi in the Hidden Leaf. But don't think you won't be more famous for it. Who do you think is more well known? The Yondaime Hokage or Jiraiya of the Sannin? Who's Jiraiya of the Sannin? Exactly. No one knows who that guy is unless they've met him or happen to be old enough to have been in the last Great War. For your information, he's like 50 and he's still an S-rank shinobi. That's what you call being a professional. Anko removed her hand and replaced both of them on her hips. So tell me, Naruto. What exactly is the elemental nature of plasma release? I've never actually heard of it. Naruto finally forced himself to relax. Anko was on his side, it looked like, so he could tell her all about it. It's made up of wind, lighting, and fire all at the same time in equal amounts. Anko whistled. Fuck, that is totally overpowered. One thing is for sure, if you didn't have that fury inside your gut, you'd have one hell of a time mastering it. I'm not completely certain, but I seem to remember that bloodline abilities generally require a crap ton of chakra to use. But luckily for you, Gaki, I'm pretty good at teaching. Her smile became noticeably feral. So show me what you can do. He backed away a step. Anko-san. Are you sure you want to spar right now? Nope. I want you to try your damnedest to kill me, so I know what level you're at. Come at me, fox boy. Naruto continued to look at her for a moment, mulling it over. Then he nodded and brought his hands together. Shadow clone jutsu. Anko waited as the smoke cleared to show 20 clones, all starting to circle her. Now this is more like a gaki. Come on. 1 week later, a long sigh escaped the Sandaime Hokage as he sat in his comfortable office chair. He was getting too old for all this, way too old. If he didn't find a suitable successor soon, he was going to have to create some memory restoring jutsu. And Naruto was still a little on the green side. Maybe in 10 years he'd mellow out enough to take the burden from him, but currently it was just a pipe dream. The elder Sarutobi stared at his desk, on which hunched the most foul, horrid putrescent beast he'd ever encountered. It could not be slain, only weakened. And it was constantly growing. If it became too large, it was bound to cause problems. For instance, not being able to see the 5 people standing behind the huge creature. Hiruzen stood in order to see over the white wall of paperwork. His gaze took in the varied expressions. Sorrow, boredom, gratitude, hunger, pity. I take it there is a reason why you have a foreign kunoichi with you, Asuma. Asuma Sarutobi, Hiruzen's son, nodded and gestured to a girl probably 14 years old. She was tall for her age with a well-proportioned body that spoke to serious training, unlike the blonde girl next to her, who looked to be suffering from early onset starvation. The Sandaime looked into her startlingly green eyes. Those eyes reminded him of Naruto's in their intensity, not to mention their vibrant color. Green as opposed to blue. Her deep emerald eyes were complemented by fair skin and a long full of ebony hair. Her bangs were trimmed over her eyes and framed either side of her face in a classic Heim-style cut. Her forehead was covered by a headband, the design upon it resembled a circle with a star inside it, lines running from the corners of the star to touch the inside of the circle. Hiruzen recognized it immediately, having visited the village once in his early years. It was called Nadeshiko Village, and it was populated almost exclusively by kunoichi. 75% of the inhabitants were female. This had made it a rather popular destination for strong male shinobi over the years, mainly because of a strange custom they had. As it went, any man from an opposing village who beat one of their kunoichi in a fair fight had to marry that girl. It had been a kind of vindictive sport for many years. Shinobi going to Nadeshiko village to collect their wives. This stopped after a few years when the kunoichi from the village developed a reputation for crippling their opponents in the most painful of ways. 100 castrations later, hardly any men visited the village at all. So why was there a young kunoichi from their village here? Hiruzen was snapped out of his thoughts by his son's words. We were heading back from our mission when we saw a plume of smoke on the horizon. My squad and I decided to go check it out. When we got there, we found a village burned to the ground. Every man, woman and child was slaughtered. Except for this one. She apparently survived by hiding in the village leader's basement. She was wandering the ruins when we found her. Hiruzen was greatly saddened by the news. This felt all too similar to the pain he felt when the Uzumaki clan was destroyed. And now the only survivor was this young girl. So she's similar to Naruto in more than one way. I understand why she'd here. Then Asuma took pity and brought her to live here at the Leaf. Kami knows it's better than Kumo or I would taking her. What is your name, young one? She didn't look away, but her eyebrows furrowed. My name is Shizuka. My mother was the leader of the village. Ino gasped. Hey. That name is totally accurate. You did say a word the whole way here. Shikamaru groaned. Ino, stop bothering her. The only reason she was quiet is because you wouldn't stop talking the whole way here. Don't talk to me like that, you slacker. Ino shouted while pointing accusingly at the self-admitted laziest ninja alive. Standing on the other side of Asuma, Choji Akimichi, the last member of Squad 10, said, at least Shikamaru admits that he's lazy, and you do talk a lot, Ino. Choji Ino growled menacingly. DSK troublesome. Asuma sighed in an exasperated sort of way. It matched Hiruzen's perfectly. Will you 3 stop that for now? The Hokage wishes to speak with Shizuka. He eyed them annoyed. As a matter of fact, why don't you 3 head to the training grounds right now? I'll be there as soon as I'm done here. Ino groaned. But sensei, we just got back from a really long mission. Can't we have the rest of the day off? He shook his head. If you keep that attitude, you'll never be the best kunoichi in the village like you keep saying you want to be. But I'm the best kunoichi in my year already. I'm on track to be on top, you know. Shikamaru scratched the side of his chin saying, wrong, Ino. You might be top kunoichi in your year, but we only recently graduated from academy. If you think about it, all the kunoichi for this year were below the halfway mark in class. Which means that the boys in the very middle of the grade are all more skilled than the best kunoichi in the whole year. And all 3 of us have been slacking since we have our clan techniques. Students like Naruto who don't have those to fall back on are going to be way ahead of us at this rate. Ino laughed. Naruto, you've got to be kidding me. He was total dead last in class. How could he beat any of us? Even Choji could pound him into the dirt. She flipped her hair behind her head as if that was that. When she saw Shikamaru's expression, she paused. Choji. You could pound Naruto into the ground, right? Choji shifted uneasily. Shikamaru told me that his dad said Naruto beat a chunin. I'm barely a genin. I don't think I could do it. Shikamaru nodded in agreement. Ino's eyes were wide with shock. No way. Behind her Asuma spoke severely. You should never underestimate others, Ino. Regardless of who they are or what they act like. I'll have you know that after the special Jonin test that each of the squad commanders gave, Naruto took second place, just below Sasuke Uchiha. That shocked even Shikamaru. Choji blanched. He's as good as Sasuke. Was he pretending to be weak the whole time? The somewhat bored voice came from the open window, causing all heads to turn in that direction. Hello, hope I'm not interrupting anything. Hiruzen shook his head. No, we were actually just discussing your student, Naruto. Would you mind enlightening his former classmates, Kakashi? Kakashi wasn't even looking at them as they spoke. In one hand was a small orange book in which his nose was well and truly buried. A second later it dropped to reveal the masked face of a certain Jonin. His classic eye smile in place. Ah, you wanted to know about Konoha's #1 most unpredictable knucklehead ninja prodigy. I suppose I could let a few hints drop. Half the room sweat dropped at the prodigy part. He closed his book with a snap and replaced it in his back pouch. Let's see, Naruto started off as the very bottom of his class, DS or straight FS in anything remotely resembling academics. A corpse had better chakra control. He knew a grand total of 4 jutsu, excluding his pranking techniques. And what else? Oh, despite all of that, he single-handedly painted all 4 of the great stone faces in broad daylight with neon pink and blue paint while wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. And didn't get caught. Then he was able to evade half the off-duty chunin in the village and 2 jonin for several hours. Kakashi sighed as if remembering good times. Now he is just as skilled if not better than Sasuke Uchiha, who is hailed as the most promising ninja since his older brother Itachi, who is currently a SS rank shinobi. His academics are marginally better. He could probably scrape by with a C. He has fairly decent chakra control, considering he has bigger chakra reserves than I do. I've counted 23 jutsu so far, 15 of which just seemed to magically pop up when he sparred. In addition to that, he's already finished level 1 of wind manipulation. As far as stealth goes, he could probably keep ahead of half the jonin in the village if it was a life and death situation. Kakashi was highly amused by the shocked faces of the genin and even Asuma, whose cigarette had taken another tumble. Even Hiruzen seemed surprised by his words. However, one person didn't seem too impressed. Kakashi's eye fell on a girl, 13 or 14 years old, with green eyes and long black hair. He absently noticed the Natashiko headband as he took in her appearance. She was very fit for a girl her age, with well-developed muscles and excellent posture. Not like Sakura or the other girls whose skill set seemed to revolve around making themselves look attractive. And there was a certain challenging gleam in her eye that he recognized. Then she said, "He doesn't sound all that impressive to me. I could do all that in my own village, plus I had straight A's in school. And I have perfect chakra control." Everyone's eyes snapped back to her with enough force to pop out of their sockets. Choji, with a potato chip halfway to his mouth, almost lost an eye as he jammed a piece of junk food in his own face. Asuma asked amazed. "You have jonin level reserves, level 1 mastery of wind release, and over 20 jutsu." She shook her head. "I don't have jonin level chakra reserves. No genin does. I assume that he must have genetically low reserve if his student has more chakra than him. But yes. I have more than 20 jutsu, and I have mastered the first step in controlling wind chakra." Kakashi's eye smile dropped as he realized he'd been underestimated again. Hiruzen stroked his beard. "Very impressive, Shizuka, but you seem to misunderstand. Naruto is somewhat special in that regard. He has so much chakra that he can't even perform Jinjutsu or the standard clone jutsu." Kakashi tilted his head. "Shizuka, huh? Quite, I like it." He hesitated before continuing. "But you see, miss, the reason this is incredible isn't because of what he can do. It's because he hasn't had a single teacher showing him how to do it until about 2 weeks ago." Kakashi stepped out of the window and into the room. "Plus there's the part where he can train for 6 hours straight and barely break a sweat. It's a bit disturbing sometimes." The room was silent for a moment. Then Ino shrieked. "I'm being left in the dust." Shikamaru and Choji both choked in unison as Ino grabbed them by their respective collars and proceeded to drag them out of the room. Asuma watched them as Shikamaru frantically attempted to break her grip. "Why gag, Ino, stop. You're gasp choking us." Choji, with his protective layer of F, was less affected by the impromptu strangling. He grunted, "Don't bother Shikamaru. You know how she is when she gets like this, better to tough it out." Ichokesai for gurgle you to say. The 3 adults and Shizuka watched as they disappeared out the office door. After a few moments passed before Shizuka muttered. "That was pathetic." Kakashi nodded in agreement, but Asuma grumbled. "You're awfully chatty now. Have you gotten over the death of your village already?" Asuma didn't disapprove, but it had only been a couple days since they left the sacked settlement and it was unnatural for a girl her age to move on so quickly. It was either a false passing on or she was just that cold. She looked back at him with piercing green eyes. I've mourned long enough. My mother taught me to accept what I can't change and change what I can't accept. I can't change the fact that she looked down. That my home is gone, but I can find the bastards who did it. An angry glint entered her eyes. I'll get strong and go back to kill the ones who destroyed my home. That's a promise and I never give up. Asuma frowned but mentally agreed with her. He stepped forward and placed a scroll on Hiruzen's desk. This is our full mission report. He glanced at Shizuka. I'll leave this one with you. Now I need to go catch my students before Ino has a chance to finish suffocating the Nara air. Hiruzen chuckled lightly. I have no doubt Shikaku would find it most troublesome to have to produce another one. But that Asuma nodded as disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Kakashi turned to Hiruzen. Anyway, now that we're past that, I was wondering if you'd found anyone to fill the last spot on our team. If I don't get someone on soon, then Naruto and Sasuke are going to have to relearn how to team fight. The way those two mesh on the training field is almost frightening. It's like they're thinking the same thing half the time. If Sasuke was more talkative, they'd be finishing each other's sentences. The Jonin recalled a certain very unsettling incident where they'd actually done that. I was almost enough to raise the hair on the back of his neck. Hiruzen for his part stroked his bear again, a self-satisfied gleam in his eyes. Well, actually, I do have one person in mid. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. Do you think she's ready? After all, she is brand new. If she's to be believed, then she is quite skilled for her age. Standing between them, Shizuka had lost her serious expression and was looking between the two men. Excuse me? Have you forgotten about me? Hiruzen shook his head amused. Of course not. We're actually talking about you right now. Shizuka turned around to look him in the eye. What do you mean? Are you saying you want me to join Konoha? As a genin? If you don't mind. You would be a part of Squad 7, which I might add is already the most promising genin team in Konoha. You'll of course be Konohanin, but you will still retain your status as the princess of Nadeshiko village. You might even make some friends who would be willing to help avenge your home and family. The young Kunoichi glanced back at Kakashi. You would actually want me on your team? Kakashi shrugged. You seem competent and level-headed. Honestly, I need someone who isn't a hothead. Naruto and Sasuke get along better than I anticipated, but they tend to build off each other, and that causes problems when I'm teaching them. Plus they're both lone wolves when it comes to training. She thought about it for a minute. Fine, I'll join your team, but you better not favorite them over me. Her green eyes seemed to fill with a malevolent glow. Cause if you do, I will make your life a living hell. I'll make you knucklehead students seem like a tame puppy. Kakashi and Hiruzen shivered mentally, of course. It wouldn't do to be seen shivering at the words of a 14-year-old girl. Naruto groaned lowly as he slid slowly into his nice freezing cold bath. He was sore as he thought it was impossible to be. And it was all because of his insistence on learning fire style from Anko. Kurama had explained to him that he needed to master more of the wind style before moving on, but he'd been too stubborn. Should have listened to Kurama. Damn, I feel like someone beat me half to death and then threw me off a cliff. A momentary image of him falling off an actual cliff came to mind while an unfamiliar voice shouting, "Good luck," rang in his ears. He shivered, both from the cold water and the strange flash of something. Naruto let his head fall back against the rim of the tub as he recalled Anko's method for teaching him how to control fire. Like all her lessons, they were devious, efficient, and downright cruel. For instance, the first one involved her heating metal shenbon with fire chakra and then throwing them at him. If they hit, then they hurt like a bitch and she would punish him. If he dodged them, it would still hurt because he wasn't that fast and couldn't actually dodge the superheated projectiles. The purpose was for him to grab the shenbon out of the air as they flew and quickly drain the fire chakra from them, leaving them bearable to hold. He'd been encouraged to try and reheat them and return fire, but he wasn't that good yet. After all, she wasn't about to give him time to heat the metal needles and launch them off. No way in hell. Of course Kurama was nice enough to heal him, but still it was aggravating and painful. After his first training session with Anko 6 days ago, he'd quickly found out that Anko was different. Kakashi would have probably described her as an S. What that meant for him was simple. Anko took every advantage of his Jinchuriki durability and pain tolerance, every chance she could. The second exercise she'd commanded him to do was to hold a metal bowl full of water. And then use fire chakra to heat the water to the boiling point, causing it to evaporate. However, his control of fire chakra was still pathetic and almost every time he managed to burn his hands. About 20 minutes ago, back at training area 44, he'd at last managed to boil one entire bowl dry without burning the crap out himself. Anko had been so pleased that she gave him a jutsu to master. High release. Fireball. It was a low chunin level technique as far as skill went. Maybe even high genin, but normally the chakra requirements were too high for genin to use it. He however didn't have that rather unfortunate problem. Chakra, as it were, was something he had in spades, diamonds, hearts, clubs, everything really. If he had horrible control. If his academics were the worst in the village. If he was dumb as a bloody doornail. If he had any problem in the world whatsoever or any disability to become a ninja, there would be one thing he'd always have: an absolute shit ton of chakra. Anko herself had told him that, and from her it was high praise. Naruto wondered what horrifying torture she would devise for him when they moved on to lightning release. Probably holding on to a weather vane while lightning stuck it and trying to funnel it into a light bulb. Okay, no need to jinx myself just yet. I don't want to be subconsciously giving her any ideas. He sighed as he allowed trace amount of fire chakra to leak out of him and into the water. After a few moments he stopped. Steam was starting to waft off the water's surface. And it all pays off right about now. Hot bath at home for the first time in ever. He sighed again, closing his eyes, and jumped as he heard a loud knocking at his door. Naruto grumbled and got out of the bath. He hurriedly wrapped a towel around himself and moved out of the bathroom and to the door. Naruto wondered who it could possibly be. No one came to see him except maybe Sasuke when he felt like getting in some heavy sparring at the Forest of Death. As the door opened, it occurred to Naruto that it might be Anko, coming to inflict some new torture, or even Kakashi, with news of a possible fourth team member. What he saw instead of them was a girl. Immediately he was caught by her green eyes. Wow, she's beautiful. The deep green of her eyes went well with her coal black hair and flawless skin. Naruto noticed that she was ever so slightly taller than him. Then again, most people were these days. He found himself unable to talk for a moment even as she examined him. Shizuka sighed in relief as the door opened and she came face to face with a spiky-haired blonde boy about her own age. He had tanned skin and the deepest blue eyes she'd ever seen. On each cheek were 3 black marks that looked oddly like whiskers. She paused. He was naked save for a large towel wrapped around his waist and held with one hand. Without realizing it, she found herself sizing him up. He had a slim build, although he seemed unnaturally muscular for his age. His torso and arms were especially well defined for a 14 years. As a matter of fact, he had quite a few scars. It clicked in her head. This boy was a shinobi. Shizuka absently reached out with her small sensory ability to sense his chakra levels. Her eyes shot open wide. She felt like a drop of water falling into a deep dark lake. She'd never sensed so much chakra before, not even in the jonin from her village. And he stood there looking at her like absolutely nothing was wrong. And his chakra felt warm, hot even. As though his blood was made of liquid lava. Hi. He waved a hand in front of her face, startling her out of her trance. Hello. My name is Shizuka. I just rented the apartment next to you. The blonde blinked once. Really? Must be pretty desperate. Hey. I'm not desperate. It's just that no one in this stupid village will take my money. I've tried everywhere else. She tapered off near the end as she saw his expression change to anger. Then as soon as she saw it, it was gone. Oh well, don't worry about it. You'll get used to it. He extended a hand. I'm Naruto, by the way. Naruto Uzumaki. Her eyes went wide again as she hesitantly shook his hand. His grip was strong without being crushing. Her mother had told her about the Uzumaki clan. Supposedly the second largest clan in the shinobi world at one time. Their single clan had made up an entire village by itself. They were supposed to have crimson hair, purple eyes, and brutal personalities, not to mention chakra that could whip a biju into submission. And there was one of their supposedly vanquished clan right here. His eyes weren't purple, and his hair certainly wasn't red, but that chakra, unless it was a huge coincidence, then that chakra must have been from his heritage. She couldn't help but feel a bit awed by him. She wondered how strong he was. Could he be a chunin? Or maybe even a jonin? It wasn't unheard of in the old days to have jonin as young as 14, which to her was shocking enough. She shook her head once and smiled back. Nice to meet you then, Naruto. Something clicked as they drew back. Wait. Are you part of Squad 7 with Kakashi Haddock? Inwardly she screamed, he's a genin. He tilted his head. Yeah. Has Kakashi-sensei been running his mouth about me again? I swear I'm going to prank him one of these days. He's forgotten what it feels like to fear the prankster king of Konoha. I haven't even done anything really fun since I mastered shadow clones. Naruto went dreamy-eyed. I can barely imagine how complex my new pranks are going to be. Shizuka watched nervously as he muttered something under his breath. She caught chili powder marshmallows and shenbon before his head snapped back up. Anyway, why did you want to know? Well, I'm going to be on your team. This might have been a really bad idea. He blinked and looked her up and down again. Naruto thought to himself, okay, so she looks like she can handle herself. I can tell she has a ton more chakra than Sakura and she stands like a kunoichi, not a model. Then again, Anko never stands like a kunoichi unless she's in the middle of a battle. So I guess she's just more serious about her skills. He surreptitiously sniffed the air, testing for her scent. She smelled great. Sakura had always smelled like strawberries. As much as he'd liked Sakura at one time, he never cared for strawberries. Shizuka, on the other hand, her scent was sweet but had a bite to it. Slightly minty too, but that could have been perfume. Overall she smelled like peppermint, but stronger, most likely due to his enhanced sense of smell. Overall he couldn't find anything to complain about. At a glance she was competent, nice, was very pretty, and smelled amazing. Naruto scratched the back of his head nervously. Shizuka watched him, getting the sense that he was evaluating her. She stood straighter, not wanting to be underestimated because of a slouch. Besides, she had a strong feeling that Naruto's opinion mattered. She didn't know why, she just did. After a few more seconds Naruto nodded once and his grin returned. "Welcome to the team then. Hope we can be friends." He scratched at one cheek. She saw his finger catch on his cheek marks. "So those are scars or something?" "No, maybe some birthmark or clan mark," Naruto asked. "So what did you want? Seeing how you didn't know I was on squad 7, you must have wanted something." "Oh, right. I was going to ask if you had hot water or not. I don't have anything but freezing cold." She saw Naruto slump. "Oh yeah, sorry about that. This place hasn't had hot water for years." His expression soured. "Normally I'd just make up something about the hot water heater being broken, but it's actually because of me." "What do you mean by that?" "The landlord, well, he really doesn't like me. It's not that I've pranked him or anything, but he tried to make things as hard as he can for me. There's never been hot water and the air conditioning has never worked. He always charges me triple the highest rent in the village." He smiled sadly. "I'm used to it, sorry you're stuck with the same stuff as me." Shizuka frowned. Why would the landlord hate you so much? It disturbed her greatly to hear him talk about it like it was routine. Was he forced alive here for some strange reason? The Hokage and Kakashi gave him a damn near glowing review. How could he be treated so badly? Naruto flinched. Sorry, I can't say. I know we're going to be teammates. It's just that I'm not allowed to tell you." He looked down. "It's not only the landlord though. It's the whole village. He's just one of the few guys who can do anything about it." "That's so unfair." "I know." She saw Naruto's face brighten for a moment. "Wait just a second. I'll be right back." Shizuka blinked as he disappeared back into his room. A second later he came back out dressed in black pants and a white shirt with a red swirl on the back. Naruto grabbed her wrist and pulled her along. "Hey. Wait a sec." He ignored her, dragging her into her own apartment with him. Her mind raced along trying to figure out what he was up to. She found out quickly enough as he brought her into her own bathroom where a very cold bath had been run already. He let go of her hand and moved to the bath. "What are you up to?" She was curious about what the blonde had in mind. Naruto knelt down and pushed both his hands under the surface of the water. Shizuka was about to speak when she felt him drawing on his chakra. Only a moment passed until she saw steam starting to wisp away from the water's surface. "How?" He stood back up, his skin drying already. "Fire release. I just pushed fire chakra out into the water and heated it up." He smiled easily again, his previous depression seeming to be forgotten. "That's amazing, I never thought of that." Something occurred to her. "Wait. You can use fire release too. But you already have wind style." Naruto stilled and nodded. "Oh yeah. Please don't tell Kakashi-sensei or Sasuke. It's a secret." She raised her eyebrow in question. "Why?" It isn't that I wouldn't like to tell them, but I can't. If I did it would end up causing me a lot of problems. I already have enough now." He looked back at her uncomfortable. "Would you mind not telling anyone about it?" Shizuka thought about it. "I guess I can keep your secret. You did heat my bath up after all, and you said you already have it hard here. But if we're out on a mission and one of us is in trouble, you better throw that caution to the wind and fight with everything you have." "Got it." "Yeah. I got it. I'll never put the safety of my friends over keeping my ability secret. You don't have to worry about that, I never go back on my word." Shizuka smirked. "Good, now would you mind leaving, Naruto? I was getting ready for a bath." His cheeks went pink and he stood quickly. "Right. I'll see you tomorrow then." "Oh. And by the way, whatever Kakashi told you, he always shows up at least 2 hours late." She blinked as Naruto left the bathroom. A short moment later she heard the door close followed by another knock as his closed as well. Shizuka looked back to her steaming bath. Well, no point wasting a nice hot bath like this. She pulled off her dark shirt and shorts, followed by her panties. Then she slipped into the bath. "Oh, this is nice, he really knows how to make a good first impression. I'll have to talk to that asshole of a landlord. Although it would be nice if I could get him to talk about the village and how things work around here. If he came in every now and then to heat a bath for me would be great." Shizuka leaned back with a slight moan. It was good to relax after such a hard week. Maybe those two were right. Some real friends would be nice. She giggled to herself thinking about it. If I was back at the village I'd have already challenged him to a duel. She paused, asking herself out loud, do my village's traditions still apply? I am the princess. The next morning Naruto woke up with a purring groan. For the first time in a long time he'd slept both without Kurama's aid and without nightmares. It was so good to be able to rest without dreaming of bad things. He honestly didn't have many happy memories to replace the nightmares. Maybe he could start working on those. He quickly sat up, noticing that he was fully an hour early. Naruto smirked to himself, realizing he would have 4 hours before meeting Kakashi. Seeing how it was an hour before he usually woke up and 3 hours before the Cyclops would show up at training ground 7. Not that he was complaining. He had a few things he wanted to take care of before he started training for the day. And the first. To have another nice warm bath. A minute or so later the water was heated and he was slipping in. He absently let his hinge drop to allow for maximum comfort. His ears twitched and a contented smile curled his lips as he leaned back in the tub. His mind lazed around for a while before he at last got around to thinking about today's schedule. For today he had 4 things he wanted to do. First he wanted to head over to the ninja weapon shop. He'd been saving for quite a while and his check from the Hokage finally came, so he was going to spend it on something worthwhile. 3 swords. One might have questioned why he was going to get 3. The reason was simple. He was getting the 3rd one for Sasuke. Sure, the Uchiha could probably afford to buy his own, but he thought it would be a good thank you gift. After all, he could honestly say Sasuke was his closest friend at the moment, breeding emo and all. He wanted the swords for their combat value too, but the main thought in his mind was his raven-haired partner. Sasuke was coming out of his shell more in these last few days. He spoke more frequently, if sarcastically. He didn't make such scathing comments to him, although neither of them gave up calling each other names. And last of all, Sasuke had actually gone to the trouble to introduce him to his jonin observer, a man named Kotoharu. Naruto hadn't even known Sasuke had an observer, but it turned out Kotoharu was a leftover from the Asuni clan. The clan once served the Uchiha, but were practically wiped out during the last Great War. Of course, Kotoharu didn't work for the Hokage as anything other than a normal jonin. In other words, he was almost like Sasuke's attendant when he wasn't out on missions. Naruto thought it was cool to have someone watching over him, but idly wished he had his own observer. Then he realized he did, in the form of a 300-foot-tall fox composed entirely of violent chakra. Though she usually took the form of a beautiful young woman these days. Anyway, the second thing he wanted to do was pull a prank he'd been planning for ages, yet never had the right timing to accomplish. Everything was ready now. He'd set things off after he got his swords purchased. Haha. The third item of the day, and the last thing before he went to training ground 7, was to show Shizuka around. After all, she was going to be on their team, or so she said. The least he could do was give her the rundown on the village. After that was training with Kakashi and likely sparring with Shizuka or retaking the bell test. In that case it would be to see how well all 3 worked as a team. Secretly he was excited at the prospect of almost killing his sensei again. What? He couldn't help it if Kurama was rubbing off on him. Besides, it would be great to have a full team of people he liked and who at least respected him. Now couldn't that be a little dream come true? After Kakashi finished training them for the day, he'd go to the Forest of Death with Sasuke. They'd train for a while, presuming the Uchiha didn't have something better to do. Then he'd train on his own unless Anko showed up. By now he was getting pretty good with wind manipulation. Kurama told him that he was ready to start on the 2nd level of wind manipulation, but that they didn't have a nearby waterfall, so he'd have to practice on boulders or trees. Oh, he couldn't wait to see Anko's or Sasuke's faces when they saw one of the massive trees cut in half. It would be so worth the effort. Not to mention how many genin ever mastered the 2nd level of wind manipulation. He was betting the answer was probably under 10. Anyone with that skill was probably already a chunin or even jonin. He'd been working with lightning as well, and oh how he loved it. Sure, it shocked the living hell out of him every time he messed up, but the jutsu it made looked so awesome. Not like wind where it was usually invisible. Lighting was one of those elements that was never really intended for stealth. Not that he had any problem with stealth. He just liked big flashy jutsu. Fire was moving along alright, though not as fast as he would have liked. It turned out that drawing on fire chakra was very similar to drawing on wind chakra. The problem was in how it was handled afterwards. And he still didn't have his control anywhere near good enough to use that jutsu Kakashi had flung at them once. He'd made learning that jutsu one of his goals, but it was decent enough to actually use fire-style jutsu without hurting himself. The 30 clones he'd once made to practice the fireball jutsu had the time of their lives taking on a giant bear they tracked down. That was for sure. Naruto grinned to himself as he imagined all the jutsu he could make for his Keke Toda. Looking up Fuin jutsu had made him aware of the sheer variety of jutsu in general. Hell, there was a jutsu that could harden a blade of grass into a tiny steel razor. There were jutsu that made plants grow and ones that could bring the dead to life. Naruto imagined that if there was a jutsu that could resurrect the dead, there were hundreds of jutsu for his Keke Toda. He just had to make them up. To that end, Kurama was teaching him the theory of ninshu or whatever she called it. Basically, she was showing him what hand seals did what and why. He rarely understood all of the spiritual stuff she added in, so the fox woman usually ended up giving him straight physical facts and leaving the rest out. It really helped sort of. He'd made one jutsu so far. He considered it a D rank, but Kurama insisted that it was A rank if he used the correct amount of chakra in the right circumstance. He called it wind style. Air step. Basically he used the tree climbing exercise, but with wind chakra. He sent it out the soles of his feet in a compressed blast. The effect was that it launched him away from whatever he was standing on. Or if he was in the air already it would blast anything in that direction away. However, his best jutsu of all time had to be the wind style, decapitating wind blade. Man, it was awesome when you just clapped your hands together and a wind shear cut a tree almost in half. He wanted so bad to go out on a C-rank mission or something and fight another ninja in a real battle. It made his blood pump just thinking about it. Ring ring, Naruto sighed. Looked like he'd have to hurry if he wanted to pull his prank. He spent too long basking in his warm bath already. Kakashi blinked away sleep with a slight start as a colossal boom echoed in his ears. He sat up, frowning and wide awake. A sudden chill was creeping up his spine as a premonition alerted him to unpleasant things ahead. For some reason, and he couldn't understand why, his gut told him it had something to do with a certain resident blonde. Wonder what he did this time? He sighed and slipped out of bed. He was already 30 minutes past his usual wake-up time. A small smile slipped across his face. At the very least he was keeping in character. It was complete chaos as Shizuka walked through the village about an hour later. Genin and Chunin, Jonin, and even Anbu were racing around the village like chickens with their heads cut off. Some were screaming, while more than a few just sobbed in corners. Yes, the village hidden in the leaves was plunged deep into the middle of a prank war. The tales were scarce, but from what she could tell it was between two rival factions, the king's foxes and the prince's monkeys. The turf war had caught the entire shinobi residential area and merchant quarter in its crossfire. Shizuka looked around with wide eyes as academy student dressed in an orange bedsheet launched past her, throwing smoke bombs and strange tags in his wake. She blinked and whirled, sending a blast of air to knock the smoke bombs out of her area. Inadvertently these smacked into the head of a blonde woman walking on the other side of the street. They exploded on impact, filling half the street with dark purple smoke. Shizuka winced and started into a run, dodging around a short boy with brown hair and a blue cape. She suddenly had to duck as a battle cry was shouted overhead, heralding a volley of marshmallows. Yes, there were. Shizuka felt something suddenly sticking to her side. She looked down and saw a tag of some sort. Panicking, she tore it off and began sprinting down the street heading for the front gates of the village. She felt that the only safe place could be Training Ground 7, where she was supposed to meet Kakashi later. This village was a war zone and she needed to get out of the line of fire. Behind her she could plainly hear the screams. One last time she glanced back, just in time to see a Jonin dragged to the ground under a pile of cats. Yes, lots and lots of ravenous cats. He seemed to be coated in marshmallows and some kind of brown flakes. And even as she watched she saw a large black one, its yellow eyes flickering with a hellish light, leap onto the Jonin's head and start chewing his ear off. She paled and put on a boost of speed before she was caught in the crossfire. 10 minutes later she broke through the tree cover onto the training area she'd been told to go to. It was fairly large, surrounded by trees with a small river going through one side of it. Across the way was also a cliff that rose just out of the trees alongside the river. She sighed and leaned down, resting her hands on her knees. She was a bit tired from her mad dash through the village. For a while she swore she was being pursued by a group of clones, as the 4 boys trying to pelt her with smoke bombs and who knew what all looked identical. Shit, what the hell was that? She muttered to herself and finally stood up straight. The first thing she saw, about 50 feet from her, was a blonde boy who she recognized as Naruto, and he was fighting himself. A lot of himself. As in like 30 copies of himself at the same time. It was simply astounding to see his skills of evasion if nothing else. He certainly didn't have the ability to fight back much with his clones, flinging everything from shuriken and kunai to the odd wind jutsu at him. He was overwhelmed by his clones, and yet he was slowly but surely narrowing them down to nothing. She watched as he ducked under a swipe of a sword, only to jump back over a wave of shuriken. The clone who had just slashed for him actually managed to deflect a few of the shuriken up at him as he was dispersed. Naruto spun as he leapt into the air, using his own blade to turn away those projectiles that would have hit him. His movements looked well practiced if strained. Her eyes tracked his twin swords as they were flung from his hands in either direction. The clones that were in the way jumped back just in time, but that wasn't the end of it. Shizuka saw Naruto's stance change. He flung his feet out to either side, twisting them at an awkward angle. Suddenly a blast of wind was emitted from the sole of each foot, completely halting his momentum. In the next instant he was spinning rapidly in the other direction. Shizuka realized a second before they followed that his swords were connected to his hands by ninja wire. The 2 swords cut through the air in a wide circle, shearing through at least 8 clones, leaving a little more than 20. Shizuka was amazed at the maneuver, which certainly didn't look like anything any Genin or Chunin would do. As far as she could tell, it was one of those moves that only tactical geniuses could pull off without making fools of themselves. Either that or getting killed. A second later Naruto apparently decided the odds had been evened enough to fight back. He landed and followed his maneuver up with a line of shuriken into the nearest 3 clones. They blocked all of them, but were unable to survive the nearly invisible blade of wind that sheared them in half. Naruto ducked to the side to avoid the cut of Anther clone's blade. He used the momentum to throw a kunai into said clone's face, killing it instantly. But this also left nothing between him and the clones that had been keeping their distance. Naruto had to perform a little acrobatic dance to avoid being skewered by the dozens of shuriken and kunai that were launched his way. A moment later the projectile stopped. The blonde original took the few seconds of breathing room to weave through hand seals rapidly and sent a compressed wind bullet into one of the more lazy copies. Then the tables turned. All the remaining clones went on a full offensive, rushing the original in a mad maelstrom of fists and legs. Naruto was suddenly getting beaten to a bloody pulp as he couldn't get even ahead but in edgewise. Or at least that's what she thought was happening. A split second later Naruto burst into a blur of movement, moving at speeds that rivaled and almost surpassed Chunin level. He jabbed out, crunching through the throat of the clone on his left. In the same movement his left knee caught the clone in front of him, dispersing it. A katana blade aimed at the back of his head was dodged and the wielder found himself impaled on a kunai. Naruto lunged, taking hold of 2 copies. He brutally smashed their heads together, turning them into clouds of smoke. As they popped he leaned backwards out of the way of a punch which, had it landed, would have surely knocked him on his ass. It was amazing just how aware of the battle around him he was. She couldn't imagine being able to fight 30-1 odds, even if she knew every weakness her enemy had. Hell. 30 genin could overwhelm a jonin if they worked well together. In the world of ninja numbers sometimes counted for nothing. But in others they decided the outcome of the battle. Seeing Naruto able to handle these odds, clones or not, was exciting. To think that she'd been put on a squad where her teammate was this good. Not to mention that her sensei was Kakashi of the Sharingan. Blind style. Directional razor. Shizuka's eyes widened as Naruto's hand swung out to either side of him, a circle of chakra forming around him and then sharpening, cutting all of the remaining clones. With a simultaneous cry they exploded into a ring of smoke around the lightly sweating blonde. What was that? Naruto turned, noticing her for the first time. He also remembered that he'd been planning on showing her around the village as a welcome gesture. Oh well, he could do it after training if she wanted. Naruto hummed as he pulled his damn hair back. It was even more unruly than usual after his exercise. Speaking of which, Shizuka was staring at him with a dumbfounded expression that made her look cute. A grin pulled at his lips and he waved at her. "Oi, Shizuka-chan. Come on over." She seemed hesitate for a brief moment. Then she walked over, glancing about the training area. Her voice came out as almost awed. "Wow Naruto, you really did a number on this place. And what was that technique?" Naruto blinked and then realized exactly what she was talking about. "Oh that. It's one of my better wind jutsu. I don't really have the control to use it in battle since it takes so many hand seals. So I usually just pump enough of my chakra into it that it works anyway." Sasuke thinks it's a waste of chakra and he wasn't the only one, but chakra is something I don't have problems with, you know. But forcing a jutsu through sheer amount of chakra isn't that dangerous. Only if you don't have enough chakra. He shrugged. "I have more chakra than a couple strong jonin or so people keep telling me." "Yeah, Kakashi-san told me as much. Supposedly he's an ninjutsu specialist, a jonin, and yet you still have a lot more chakra than he does." She frowned, still slightly wary of a genin with that much chakra. "How can you have so much chakra anyway?" "I've heard of the Uzumaki clan from my mother, but it seems a bit much for a genin." Naruto blinked, frowning for a brief moment before his grin reappeared. "It's not something I should really tell you right now. I only found out about it a little while ago. Don't worry about it for now. It's something I was born with." "That's not much info." "No it isn't, but I'm not supposed to tell you." Naruto scratched his cheek thoughtfully. "Maybe if we get in a life or death situation and it looks like we're toast you'll find out about it. Or you could ask Kakashi-sensei, but I don't think he would tell you." Shizuka crossed her arms. "Well fine. You still haven't told me about that jutsu you used." "Oh. You heard what it's called right? Well I created it myself. It's based off of the decapitating wind blade technique, but it hits everything at head level around you instead of just what is in front of you. It actually took me a long time to get the hand seals right, but it's usable now. Once I get my chakra control up to a level where I can use it without hand seals at full strength, then you'll see just how awesome a jutsu it is." "You actually created your own jutsu?" She is shocked to say the least. Creating jutsu was usually part of the test to become a jonin. During the exam to be promoted you had to submit a new jutsu to the examiner, something of your own creation which was then graded on its use, efficiency, and power. Something like what Naruto created wouldn't get him a promotion, but shinobi usually didn't start to experiment with jutsu creation until they'd been chunin for a while. And Naruto had just been made a genin. Naruto coughed politely. "Well not really. I just modified a jutsu that was already out there. I don't have a good enough grasp on jutsu theory to create completely new jutsu. I just extended the range to surround me entirely. It only added 4 hand seals to the original jutsu. I'm also trying to create a wind jutsu that works like this jutsu Sasuke knows. He can't do it yet because it takes too much chakra, but by the time he does master it, I'll have my own version. Naruto grinned. Once I'm a chunin I'll have a ton of jutsu in my arsenal. How many jutsu do you know? Naruto thought for a moment. I'd say about 40. Most of them are C rank or D rank though. I only have 2 B rank wind jutsu. The B rank she almost shuriki'd. How do you know such high level jutsu as a genin? Who taught you them? One finger rose to Naruto's lips. Shush, I have my ways. At least show one to me if you're not going to tell me how you got them. Shizuka hissed. Naruto raised one eyebrow, his tone imperious. And what are you gonna give me if I show you one of my best jutsu? Why would you charge me? I'm your new teammate. Don't know, maybe I'm just being unreasonable. Naruto grinned. So Shizuka. Do I get something for sharing my super awesome B rank jutsu? She scowled. I have an A rank wind jutsu, but I'm a long way from having the control to use it. There wouldn't be any point to teaching it to you. With your massive reserves it might be years before you could use it. Aw, that's no fair, Shizuka-chan. Oh well. My technique is something else I came up with on my own. It's basically a combination of the Great Breakthrough technique and the wind bullet technique. Exactly how does that work? Naruto turned to the side, gesturing to the trees opposite them. See those trees? Well, this is the normal Great Breakthrough. He stilled for a moment and then brought his hands together in a harsh clap. A wave of compressed air exploded from them and was further magnified by his chakra, turning it into a massively overpowered wind gust. The trees themselves didn't move, but their branches were blown back or simply ripped off. Naruto smiled and then made half a dozen hand seals and made the exact same move. The result this time was very different. Not only were the leaves and branches ripped away, but head-sized wind bullets crashed through the forest like cannonballs fired at high velocity. They reduced the trees to splinters on impact and gouged great trenches in the earth. What was left behind in the wake of the technique was a little piece of complete devastation. In the back of Naruto's mind he imagined that the only thing missing were a few little patches of unquenchable black flames. Yeah, that would be a nice touch, wouldn't it? Somewhere in the land of rain a dark-haired man sneezed explosively and went back to chastising his oversized blue friend for his most recent killing spree. Shizuka blinked in amazement. That was amazing, and you just combined 2 techniques to do that. Not exactly. I also put a lot of chakra into it. If you did the same thing it wouldn't do nearly as much damage just because I have way more chakra than you. Naruto sighed as if having colossal amounts of chakra was a burden in life that he just had to put up with. But after a moment he perked up. Anyway, the other B rank I know is the Wind Dragon technique, except that the regular version is a bit wimpy. It's basically just a great breakthrough with added chakra shape manipulation. My Wind Dragon is basically made out of wind blades. That sounds vastly overpowered for a B rank. And it would be if it didn't take so many damned hand seals. Stupid jutsu would be great, except it takes 50 to use, which is part of the reason I want to master my wind release as fast as I can, so I can actually use some of these jutsu like they were meant to be used. She nodded and looked around the clearing. Yeah, so how long do we have to wait before the others show up? A little while for Sasuke. A long while for Kakashi-sensei. Is he always late? Well, it's rumored that he's on time during emergencies, but it's an unconfirmed story and the sources aren't the most reliable. Naruto shrugged. If he had a girlfriend or wife or something he'd have an excuse to be late. But he doesn't have anything close to that. You sound like a damn journalist. Shizuka muttered. Naruto raised his hands into the air in a dismissive gesture. He turned around looking away from her. So you know Kakashi-sensei is going to test us as a team today. Huh? Well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Why? Well, it's just that I want to try and kill him. Shizuka blinked and pushed a finger into her ear, twisting a few times. Then she turned that ear in his direction. Would you mind saying that again? Do you want to try and kill your Jonin-sensei? Not like that. Naruto shook his head vehemently. It's just that the first time me and Sasuke fought Kakashi-sensei, we completely caught him off guard and almost burned him to ash. And we've managed to really catch him off guard a few times since then. Today I want to put him through the ringer. Plus I've requested Konohamaru to mark Kakashi-sensei as a priority target. Priority target? I don't even want to know what that means. It means that Kakashi is going to be looking a bit tired and hopefully he'll be easy to surprise today. Shizuka looked at him with an odd expression for a few minutes, not saying anything. Then all at once her eyes went wide and she pointed an accusing finger at him. You're responsible for the chaos going on back at the village. Naruto hummed and attempted to not look smug. Yes, there's no point in trying to hide it. You are a prankster. Your sensei said something to that effect when I met him. She growled. What is the whole point of doing that anyway? He frowned suddenly. Why should I tell you? My goals are confidential. She spluttered indignantly. Confidential. Naruto nodded. How could a lowly girl like yourself, who has never experienced what it is like to be lord of all pranks in the greatest ninja village in the world, could be worthy to know my grand plan? It would be pointless. You probably couldn't even comprehend my schemes. Shizuka's eyes narrowed dangerously, the emerald color seemed almost to glow. You really think that? Then maybe I should just kick your prankish ass so hard that your parents start bleeding. That would be hard for several reasons. Really? And why is that? The frown suddenly marred his features. First, because my parents are dead. And second because I seriously doubt you're fast enough to hit me. I outrun Jonin, you know. I'm no lightweight. If it wasn't for my lack of experience I'd be a chunin already. Well, I'm no lightweight either, blonde. So don't be thinking Yusurka, is this our new teammate? Naruto and Shizuka stopped quickly. The blonde immediately recognized the voice as belonging to Sasuke, while Shizuka turned to look at the newcomer. What she saw was a kid her same age with an average, yet lean and muscular build. His hair was coal black, the same color as his eyes. The pale complexion along with the crest on his shirt proved that he was an Uchiha. She'd never realized that the last Uchiha was a genin, now that was surreal, wasn't it? The most powerful clan in Konoha had been reduced to a single genin. Had she been someone else, she might have pitied him, but she hated when others pitied her. So why should she do the same to others? So you're Sasuke Uchiha?